What's the dumbest reason you've been fired? On Thursday, my boss has her daughter's dance recital that she had been planning for months. 3 days prior, I was asked to be a date to a wedding. I said yes and asked my boss, who immediately said no. We ended up getting coverage, and the wedding and the recital went off without a hitch. However, Thursday and Friday night, I'd started on some new meds for my incredibly serious illness beginning with a C, and they made me incredibly drowsy. So much so to the point that I overslept by 2 hours. On Friday, I started calling my boss, I have call logs, and as soon as she hears it's me, she hangs up on me. This happened 6 times before I make it to work, alternating between her cell and the store telephone. As soon as I get there, I try to plead my case and clock in. She immediately tells me to clock out as I'm a no clock, no show. I don't understand how this is possible, especially given the call logs and the fact that I'm seen on the security footage, and I clocked in anyway. I tried to get her to sit down in the office to talk calmly, and she, a very devout Christian woman who rarely curses, screamed at the top of her lungs to get the frick out of her office. At this point, I'm very confused. I have no idea why she'd be so angry at me. And then I find out. The day of the wedding, my boss let me go home early and get ready. I made a post on Facebook saying, "Out of work, time to get ready." Thank God she let me out of work early for once, considering all the times I covered for her. I'm not friends with her on Facebook, and I find out the one customer I'm friends with on Facebook showed her the message while she bragged about the recital. F that noise. I know what she's trying to do. She's trying to get me another no call, no show. So I show up right on time, walk in the building to be seen on all the security cameras, clock in, and then get escorted out. Beat the system as best as I could. And tonight I spent time printing out some 40-odd emails where I covered shifts for her and did things for her that she said I didn't. I also printed out all the call logs, and I'm going to have my doctor fax first thing tomorrow for the 2 days I overslept due to my new cancer meds. 1 copy for her, 1 copy postmarked for employee organizational development. I got a phone call from my boss this morning, being told I'm getting 2 days off, paid, and will reconvene come Wednesday. I'm assuming they're attempting to find a store to transfer me to very far away to give me the option to relocate or quit, therefore getting out of paying my unemployment. In short, overslept, went to a wedding, made a Facebook post, employer saw it. I'm going to get fired as a result since she doesn't have to have a reason. Yay, unemployment. Okay, update. And I'm fired. HR was waiting for me the second I walked in the door. I tried to plead my case, but they just weren't having it. It's definitely one of the worst days of my life right now, as reality is starting to set in. I mean, of course they had that ambush set up the moment you came in. Sorry that happened to you, dear author. It sounds like a raw deal. You probably shouldn't have made that post. That's a learning moment right there. I hope you've moved on to better things and that the wedding was an absolute rager to somewhat compensate for what happened to you. I worked midnights at a steel mill as a very young adult for 2 years. I had access to the entire network to do some of my work, even though I was just a general laborer. Union shop. Long story short, someone had left their login and password in a file on the public directory. I, being the good little worker, pointed it out to my direct supervisor. From there, I thought it was over. Turns out, he took this account that belonged to a wonderful older woman that also happened to have unrestricted access and logged into very adult websites at work. He was busted. What does he do? He points the finger at me and says I'm the one that gave him the password and login. Blam. Fired for, quote, hacking a corporate network. I got fired for turning in my 2-week notice. WorldCom sucked anyway. I got fired for turning in and working my notice and then not going back to work. We regret to inform you that due to your prolonged absence, we can no longer wish for you to work here. I quit 2 months ago. I worked in this costume shop, and my boss, who was obviously very unhappy with her life, had built this place up in her head and acted like we were some designer store on Rodeo Drive. In my free time, I wrote for a couple of local blogs and magazines and went to events, Fashion Week, and things like that. I always got invites to these events, and she never did, and she'd always say it was because she's too important for them, so people were too intimidated to invite her. When I'd work the day after an event, she'd pick on me the entire day and say the event was probably lame and all the people there had to be tacky. She even got in my face and called me a working girl one day because a guy from one of the events recognized me and said hello while I was working. Finally, after I got an amazing opportunity and got to cover Fashion Week and go for free and everything, I went into work and she told me I was fired. I'd betrayed her. Plus side is, I immediately got offered a job at an actual clothing store with benefits and commission. No more selling pimp and hot dog costumes. I saw a dishwasher at the old restaurant I worked at get fired because one of the cooks at the time got mad and threw a plate across the kitchen. The plate shattered, and seconds after, the owner walked in and without any further inquiry fired the person responsible for washing the dishes. I can beat this. My boyfriend worked in a restaurant where a waitress got fired after a dishwasher threw a plate across the kitchen at her face and cut her badly enough that she needed stitches. Management claimed they never saw the dishwasher throw the plate, and so they fixed the squeaky wheel and fired the waitress. I was scheduled to work on a Friday and got diagnosed with mono on a Monday. I don't know if you've ever had mono, but it knocks you on your butt pretty hard. I showed my employer my note on Monday and was promptly picked up by my mother and brought home to get taken care of properly. I got a text from my boss on Friday saying that I needed to come in or I was fired. When I reminded him I had mono, he said that my job was to sit at a desk and take to-go orders. I also check to-go orders, which means I have direct contact with people's food. Dumbest crap ever. 8-hour shift by myself most days. Management sent me to deposit money into the bank when we were overflowing with cash. I wrote schedules when the manager needed me to. I was getting bonuses weekly from the home office because of my sales and customer service. I never cheated, I never stole, I loved that job. I envisioned myself working there until after I graduated college. Sure, I wasn't being paid crap, but they were flexible with my school hours, and that's all I really wanted at the time. They closed a store a city over, which my boss's wife happened to manage due to poor sales. They decided to promote my boss to regional and move her over to my store and have her manage it. She's been with the company 15 years, so it's cool. Whatever. I've met her a couple of times. Within a day of her being there, she starts telling me everything I'm doing is wrong. Within 2 days, I'm being written up for the first time ever in 4 years because I clocked in 5 minutes before my shift was supposed to start. My previous manager always had me clock in as soon as I came in so I could get to work on shipment and phone orders. Day 3 rolls around, the new manager has a girl from her former store come in and fill out an application and wants me to show her the ropes of how things work here. Day 4, the old boss, who's now regional manager, catches me before I walk in. Can't look me in the face at all during the conversation. Reason for termination? Poor sales. I guess I got it lucky. They fired me in November. They fired the assistant manager who'd been there 8 years right before Christmas. I felt worse for her. She had kids. But yeah, I don't hold a grudge or anything. I needed it for a dose of reality. Up until that point, I thought a loyal employee meant a loyal employer. Yep. I've been relatively lucky with bosses who at least had something resembling a sense of decency towards their employees, but this is far from an uncommon experience for people who make their work their life. The Michael Scotts of the world will throw the Dwights under the buses at the drop of a hat. I was fired from an ice cream shop for not being gay. It turned out the manager was looking to replace the young girl who'd been working there before me and who she had been having a lesbian relationship with. Apparently, my general manager lost out on his Christmas bonus because too much money had gone missing on his watch, so he was super angry. So he comes in one night, he wasn't working, and asks to see this tiny little 18-year-old kid who'd just been promoted like 2 weeks prior outside. I was 21 at the time, and the other manager was maybe 5'5" and 120 pounds soaking wet. About 20 minutes later, the GM comes back in, rubbing his knuckles, and looks me in the eye and says, "Hey Paul, I'm going to need you to clean up some blood." So in shock, I go outside and sure enough there's blood all over the back smoking and garbage area. I start to clean it up while he stands and watches me while telling the sap story of his life and money woes and how much this kid deserved it. He then goes home and the rest of the staff and I are just kind of standing there shocked that this just happened. About an hour later, the 18-year-old manager comes back and his face is barely recognizable. I told him to go to the hospital, but he refused for whatever reason, and he said he called the cops and asked me to back up his story, which I told him I would. So another half hour or so passes, and the cops show up at Taco Bell, and I give them a statement that's completely truthful. Chatted with the cops for a while, give them some free tacos, and then head home for the night. Next day, I come into work, and the GM asks to see me outside. Now, I'm 6 foot tall and 275 pounds and grew up in a rougher neighborhood, so I'm not some easy target, and at that point I was almost eager for him to hit me so I can teach him a lesson. He got in my face and it seemed like he was weighing up his options, but he decided against it and just asked me if I talked to the cops, to which I replied yes, and I'm surprised he hadn't been arrested already. He then says, "Finish out your shift and don't bother coming back. You're fired." So I said, "Oh hell no. If you're going to fire me, you have to have the stones to do it in front of everyone." So I walk back inside, ask all of the staff that were there to gather around, and that the GM has something he'd like to say. So put on the spot, he fires me then and there, and I go home to call the labor board to see how badly I can sue their butts for wrongful termination. Turns out I can't. I hadn't worked there long enough and didn't make enough money, which really ticked me off. I hated that job anyway, and I got another one pretty quickly, so it wasn't a huge deal, but it still blows my mind, and people rarely believe me when I tell the story. In short, I was fired from Taco Bell where I was manager because my general manager beat the crap out of one of the others for stealing from the register. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below, and if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I worked at a gas station in Chicago making about $700 a week. I had one day off a month and I had to come in to do inventory on that day. I didn't mind all the hours because the pay was good. Anyways, I came down with an infection near my eye and went to the ER. The doctor told me I had to be admitted. I said I couldn't do that because I had to work. He told me best case scenario I'd lose my eye, but that more likely the infection would go to my brain and I'd die. So I called work and let them know I was in the hospital. Spent 4 days there hooked up to an IV that gave me 24 hours of antibiotics a day. Finally got out and went to work and got fired because of it. He told me it was because he needed someone for that shift and he really couldn't let them go after just hiring them. And to top it off, he fought my unemployment claim. The company was too small to sue them over it. The guy only owned 2 gas stations. To sue under the FMLA, the employer has to have more than 50 employees. He had a total of 7. I spoke with 3 different lawyers and they all said the same thing. They were all very disappointed about that. I think they wanted to sue him more than I did. So I understand this is only marginally relevant, but it definitely ranks among the dumbest firings of all time. It turns out the entire crew of the Titanic was fired effective the morning of the 15th of April 1912. Yep, that's right, before the ship even entirely sank, everyone was fired. And get this, it was for abandoning ship and disembarking on the high seas. And by the way, this was all employees, even the dead ones. When the few that survived made it to shore, they had nothing. No money, no employer, no support, nada. Of course, the whole thing was a maneuver by the White Star Line to avoid paying out to families the wages and pensions and insurance claims that would be generated. Luckily, subsequent lawsuits reversed a lot of this. If you want an example of asinine employer jerkery, well, it's hard to beat that. I lost my phone the night of my college's senior formal. That night, I got a call from my boss announcing an emergency meeting the following morning, which obviously I missed, and I was immediately fired along with 2 of my colleagues. So stupid. The meeting was to review 5 new menu items. I got fired from my university sports center job as a pool lifeguard for posting on Facebook that I found substances in a toilet there. The next day I had a phone call asking me to remove said status, and shortly afterwards an email to inform me that my employment had been terminated on grounds of besmirching the university's good name. No joke, HR actually used the word besmirching. I would have been impressed if I wasn't so furious. The university is in the UK, if anyone was wondering. Well, I hope that you went full fire and fury on your old workplace and published a laundry list of every other crappy thing that you saw go on there. You probably didn't, given that you wanted to find another job, but they deserved it. Although most of us know that there's a reasonable risk of firing if we post something like that. I was once fired from a radio news director job for being, quote, a loose cannon. I never know what you're gonna do next. This was in reference to news stories and when they aired. I guess I should have shown him my magic calendar that told me when and where news would happen. I was fired 2 years into a position that I was really great at for not wearing any makeup and answering the phone on 2 rings, not 1 ring. I was fired by the store manager who was there for 1 week. The owner was furious at him, but I refused to go back. I was fired for refusing to help my boss forge receipts for his tax audit. I had the best college job in the world, watching the library computer labs on campus. I had about 4 shifts of varying length every week, and I'd always show up on time. Very, very rarely had someone cover, and I would pick up a shift every other week or so. There was rather a large automated system, so my boss knew I was among the more reliable lab attendants, which he even admitted after firing me. Anyway, there is one meeting before the start of each semester, and if you didn't show up for the meeting, you're fired. End of story. There was nothing important at the meeting. If you sent an email letting him know you weren't back in school yet, he wouldn't fire you. When you consider the meeting would last about 15 minutes and there was really nothing to cover, it's all very arbitrary. He just had to fire a few people a year to make his job look important. I sent an email saying I wouldn't be on campus yet, but he didn't receive it. He sent me an email at the start of semester letting me know I was fired, which is kind of like breaking up with someone via Twitter. I replied asking to meet him in person, which he pretty much never did with any of us, except for that one meeting. And after going back and forth, I was finally able to meet him, and I showed him the email I sent. He admitted it was very hard to fire me as I was a very reliable lab attendant and picked up shifts no one wanted. He'd still probably have to fire me using the excuse, well, what else do I say to the other 2 people I fired for the same reasons? What if they come up with an email too? I asked if I was in fact still fired, and he said, I'll have to think about it. I requested very clearly that at the very least he call me or have me come by his office to tell me I was fired. 3 days later, he sent me another email saying I was still fired. Mainly, I was angry that I was fired by email, and this guy, who was such a lazy, useless boss that he contacted me all of 0 times the year I worked in the labs, didn't even have the stones to fire me in person. I was subbing for an 8th grade history teacher once. He had about 4 periods of the same course, and all I needed to do was play a PowerPoint, which included a video, and read the slides aloud to the students. Prior to the last class of the day, one of the students messed around with the computer, and the PowerPoint was no longer usable, or I couldn't find it. I don't remember, I just know I was crap out of luck at that point. Luckily, the teacher had printed out the PowerPoint slides for me, and I'd remembered almost everything that was on the video. I'm also a good teacher, and I'm pretty good with improv. I started delivering the information from memory and was pretty entertaining, but I got a bit carried away with myself when I said, and then the king said, let's get those French bastards, and war began, or something to that effect. The important thing is that I swore. The next day, the principal called me into his office and said some students reported me for saying the B word. I knew I'd made a mistake, but I hadn't used the term directed at students, and never mind the fact that I improvised the lesson from memory and on the spot. Never mind the fact that the students were entertained and spent the whole of the lesson giving me their undivided attention and asking excellent follow-up questions, a sign of engaged learning. I was removed permanently as a sub for that school because of this one incident. I was and still am a very talented substitute, but I get into occasional trouble because students refuse to speak to me if they have an issue and instead choose to report me out of context to their principal. I truly hate my job because of the terrible imbalance of power both students and teachers hold over subs. I always feel like I'm about to lose my job, no matter if I'm a very active, great sub or if I'm a lazy, passive sub. There is no victory. My first aircraft maintenance job out of college. I was working for a guy running a small shop at a rural airport. He was quite a character. A real hardliner that had the highest expectations of me and the other employee and would get angry if we took too long, in his opinion, to do something. For example, we got an aeroplane in for our 100-hour inspection that was obviously long overdue and crap was completely neglected on the previous one. The spark plugs were so caked with lead that it took me an hour to clean them out. He got mad that it took longer than the typical half hour and wouldn't hear any of my excuses. He'd get mad at me for taking too long to cut open an air filter in spite of his shop being a complete mess and it taking me 10 minutes to find the filter cutter. Even he didn't know where it was. Despite these factors, he rarely did any work himself and set a bad example for us or downright messed it up. But he sat in the office allowing me, a completely green apprentice, and his other employee, a 4th-year apprentice, to work unsupervised, and would take hour-long coffee breaks. If the other employee or I would get up to head back to work before he was done with his coffee, he'd tell us to sit and relax. Anyway, when my 3-month probationary period was ending, he called me into his office and started grilling me about random aircraft knowledge. Again, since I was fresh out of school and that was my first job, I had very little practical knowledge, and looking back now, half the crap he was asking was stuff even a 2 to 3 year journeyman would be unlikely to know. So of course, I didn't know the answers to a lot of the questions. He got angry, as usual, and started ranting about the terrible quality of graduates the college was turning out, and how he was going to phone them and complain, and then he sent me back to work saying he had to think long and hard about whether he wanted to keep me on. I thought about it for the rest of the day and was pretty sure he was going to fire me, so the next morning I showed up, and as soon as he arrived I told him I was quitting, packed up my tools and left. I got a better job a week later at a reputable company that did things by the book, working supervised under a journeyman, and received absolutely glowing performance reviews and a good reference when I left for another job. In short, had a sketchy first job, and I quit before the boss fired me. When is it smart to pretend to be stupid? There was this Chinese restaurant near where I live. Years and years ago, a guy came in and handed the greeter a note that said, "I have a weapon, give me your money." The woman examined the note and then handed it back to the man, shaking her head. "You want food? What do you want to eat?" The man began to quietly explain that he had a piece. "Gum? What gum? We don't sell gum. You want chicken?" While she was busy with this guy, one of the chefs in the back caught on to what was going on and called the cops. Of course, the greeter spoke perfect English. It can be easier to pretend to be dumb if you know a lot about a topic, and someone is trying to give you poor advice on that topic, and you don't really feel like spending the next 30 minutes trying to make them understand the error of their ways. When your family asks you to fix their computer, the first time you do it, every problem they have down the road is going to be on you. My mum has called me from 300 miles away to have me fix some computer issues of hers. I end up having to remotely access her computer with Join Me, and it's a pain. I have to say, click on the orange button. I don't see it. It's right in the middle of the homepage. It says About. Should I click on About? No. We provide a variety of services. No, go back, and have offices in 15 countries, including... Just avoiding telling them you know anything works even better if, like the narrator, you have a brother who knows nearly as much or slightly less about computers, but is a nicer person who isn't a liar like you are. Maybe this tactic can sacrifice him to the parents and save your sanity. I heard a story about a Chinese-Australian kid getting busted for not having a train ticket. When the inspector confronted him, he responded in this very heavy, "What? I no understand," ignorant Asian migrant accent. Eventually, the inspector gives up and just tells him the rules and to have a ticket next time. After the inspector leaves, the kid turns to his mates and says in a perfect Aussie accent, "Frick, I love being Asian." My father had this habit that my mother has constantly reminded me of since he died. No matter how well-versed he was on a subject, he always let the other person do the talking first, then would ask them questions. Not only was he able to learn more, but it naturally made him entertain opinions contrary to his own, making him a much more open and humble person. If the person didn't know what they were talking about, the discussion didn't descend into an argument, they'd just slowly realize they were talking to someone much more informed, based solely on the questions he was asking, which in turn made them a lot more open to receiving an alternate opinion as well. There was this story that Andy Rooney told about a reporter from Stars and Stripes. He said the reporter would act as dumb as a rock when interviewing someone, and the person being interviewed would way over-explain the answers trying to help the reporter understand. The reporter was then able to write stories with greater details and better descriptions. Rooney said one time a pilot was interviewed by this reporter, and after the reporter left, the pilot told Rooney, "That man was so dumb I practically had to explain what an airplane was." Acting dumb is a great tactic when you need someone with a fragile ego to cooperate. When the cops show up at a house party, who lives here? I don't know. Who broke this bottle in the street? No idea. Where are the substances? Substances? What substances? Who drives the 2005 Camry out front? Beats me. I feel like the stupid act can be useful if you intentionally lower someone's expectations of you, then you have more options available to you later, depending on the situation, of course. Slightly related, isn't there an old proverb that's like, "It's better to keep your mouth shut and be thought a fool than to open it and remove all doubt"? I do this all the time. Mouth breathe, 1,000-yard stare. It really cuts down on people wanting me to do things for them. In many negotiations, the ignorant person will come out ahead. Stupid questions take time and can wear an adversary down. I've asked a car salesman, how much do I save if I take out the sunroof because I don't want it? Of course, he thought I was an idiot, but the next thing you know, the value of the sunroof is being deducted from the price. On a larger scale, the Russians have historically used this tactic when negotiating things like treaties. They've often pulled the language card. Their interpreters are not understanding what you're saying, and they need every line explained over and over. Stupidity wears people down, and they'll give you what you want just to get rid of you. When I was in college, I got a job at Sam's, and they told me I was in electronics because I knew computers. Later, my manager chewed me out for not zoning everywhere on my side of the store. Pretty soon, I lost all of my computer knowledge and became a drooling idiot that just put boxes on shelves. If you get a job in retail, any extra skill you have is just a liability without extra compensation, and you'll get used for it. If you're developing a relationship with someone and they start talking about a subject you're well versed in, just let them explain it, ask questions, and it'll naturally make your relationship progress. When you play with kids, you should let them show you things that you never knew before. I have a teacher who tells the story of his green herb using friend from high school. He went to the same school I'm at now, which is a private Catholic school. They take substances pretty seriously and they expel students over them. So this buddy of mine, let's call him John, had started selling green herb, and the administration caught on. The dean of students at the time checked this guy's locker and found a ton of Mary J in it. He was called in the next day and told, "I know you have that stuff in your locker because I already checked. Just tell me the names of who you sold it to and I'll lighten the punishment." Well, he tells the dean a list of 3 or 4 guys that were all caught already and waiting outside. He says that's the list as he remembers it. It's not, he sold it to a lot of people. The dean sends him on his way and deals with the rest of the kids. Later that day, this one guy I know is called in because him and the dealer are friends. This guy is in a National Honors Society and works on the newspaper, 4.0 GPA, overall a good kid. The dean thought that he wouldn't lie and would rat out everyone who bought. The dean was wrong. This guy gets to the dean's office, walks in and sits down. The dean says, "Look, I busted John for possession of green herb and I know you have a—" My friend interrupts him. Whoa. John had green herb? Don't do this, Chad. No, you sure you got the right John? I'm sure. I just had no idea. I mean, we've been friends for years and he's never shown any interest in that stuff. Come on, Chad. No, can I just talk to him about this? I'm sure it's a misunderstanding. Chad, get the frick out of my office. So the moral of the story is to always deny or feign ignorance. It's a tactic that has worked for the narrator on many occasions. Living in a foreign land has gotten me out of trouble a number of times because I'm just a dumb foreigner. Then I listen to them talking about how dumb I am in my second language, and they move on. I thank my lucky stars and wipe off the cold sweat. When talking to people who like to argue just for the sake of it, no matter how well versed your views are, they'll find some stupid ways to crap all over them. Just shut up, pretend you don't know anything, and take the wind out of their sails. When your former employer is getting audited by the IRS and you're just a cashier at the car wash, copy Skylar White and play the dumb bimbo or medicated loser. Jury duty. They sent me home after asking me some questions. They asked me if I knew what something meant, and I stayed quiet for a couple of minutes until they explained it like I was 5, and I still told them I didn't understand. It's nearly always best to play dumb. I've come to find if you act like you don't know, most people will tell you what they know. If you do this long enough, you should acquire all the world's info. Seriously though, play dumb until you can't anymore, and if you're ever called on it, I usually just keep playing dumb and saying something like, "Oh, well, I wasn't sure if that was actually right or not. Now we know." When someone is obviously trying to exploit you, there's nothing more fun than pretending to be computer illiterate when you get one of those fake tech support calls. You know the ones, heavy Indian accent claiming to be from Microsoft, and see how long you can keep them on the line before they hang up. 1975 Cambodia. They executed anyone seen as being too intelligent. Anything IT related unless it's your job. I was the unofficial IT for my department until a woman brought in her laptop from home and left it on my desk to fix. I told her that was very inappropriate and that I can't take the liability of fixing her home computer. She slammed the door and cursed me out, and it was the only time I've yelled at a coworker, "You will never slam a door on me again." She said, "Get the frick back to your office and sit down. You will never curse at me again, and by God you'd better start acting your age at work, or at least act my age," I said as a 27-year-old reading the riot act to this 55-year-old woman. Our boss apologized on her behalf, but the woman didn't get reprimanded at all, and eventually I left for another project. Now I just pretend to be dumb, but magically the printer and scanner and shared files and secure file transfers always work for me, so I think my coworkers are catching on. In eastern Ukraine, a friend and I got stopped by some thug on the street who was threatening us and implying that he was going to take our money. We pretended to not know Ukrainian. It ended up going fine. So I guess in that moment it was smart to pretend to be stupid. Similar thing happened to me on the streets of DC. Some guys came up to me and asked for my money and cell phone, but I'd just gotten out of a loud concert so I couldn't hear them at first. I just nodded and laughed and kept walking. They followed for a moment, but then I got to an area with more people and they melted away. People underestimate you, then you plan your moves without them even knowing that you could. When meeting your girlfriend's parents and play What's a Potato? When you're trying to catch someone in a lie. When you know all of the details but you just want to see them weave a tapestry of bullcrap. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. In a deposition, the less you say, the better. Also, I don't know and I don't remember are perfectly acceptable answers. You can play dumb in basic training for the armed forces. It saves you trouble, but it also saves you promotions. When you regularly find yourself in situations where you have to interact with stupid people for long stretches of time. I interact with uneducated blue-collar men in their 50s and 60s every day. Being too smart around them is a surefire way to marginalize yourself. When someone says, "I'm gonna shoot you if you're smart." When appearing too smart would trigger or offend people who you don't want to trigger or offend. It can be a friend or a cop pulling you over. When you're in a bar with a bunch of drunk, violent rednecks. I'm a recent graduate with a science degree and I'm applying for lots of jobs. I have my professional CV for career jobs, and then I have my slightly crappier, shorter CV for applying to dead-end jobs. My logic is that a company doesn't want to employ a recent science graduate in a customer service role if they know the employee will jump ship as soon as a career opportunity comes along, so I dumb myself down. Damn, the narrator wishes he'd made this move 2 years ago, was desperate and looking for literally anything, even minimum wage retail. Got no callbacks. But yeah, they'd probably wonder why someone with all of my adult job experience wouldn't leave them for something better as soon as the opportunity presented itself. And they'd be right. Play dumb when questioned by the Inquisition. Play dumb when you're a prisoner of war. See Doug Hegdahl. When you find a coworker's mistake at work, if you tell them that it's wrong, people automatically get defensive. If you say you don't understand why they did something the way they did, they'll find the mistake themselves. Also, if there's no mistake, it won't blow up in your face. Presumably, when you're arguing with a person who doesn't know much about the subject but just tries to look clever. Pretend to be dumb and ask them questions, from simpler to more difficult ones, and they'll eventually show their lack of knowledge, which you can exploit. That's what I heard works, at least some ancient Greek philosopher used this, I think. However, I'm too stupid to use it myself. When you happen upon a hostage situation, if you pretend to be mentally challenged, it's possible you'll be able to catch the dude off guard. Any time where you won't be paid for it, but you'll be expected to keep doing it once you show that you can. As a woman, I completely pretend to know nothing about technology or money when a salesman comes to the door. Sadly, my husband takes care of that and is out of town for a month is an easier way to get rid of them than I don't want it. When you encounter a know-it-all neckbeard kind of person, it's more entertaining to play dumb and listen to their wealth of knowledge, even if you know they're full of crap. It isn't worth starting an argument or hurting feelings, most of the time. Basic training. When the drill instructor says, "Anyone got a driver's license?" and all these hands go up, "Perfect. You, and you. Clean the johns." If you hear, "Does anyone have?" it's a trap. Be as stupid as possible and keep your mouth shut. Maybe not stupid, but ignorant. When my mum or fiancé shows me some video or asks me about something I've seen or already read about, it's usually better just to play along. Literally all the time, showing any capability at anything other than what's required of you is a great way to be exploited. I love when hard work is rewarded with more work. Everything's done. Go home early? Nope. Get an extra break? Nope. Extra pay? Don't be stupid. Promotion? Nope, you're too good at this work and we can't afford to lose that. Stay exactly where you are and have another shoveling of this lovely, delicious work. Maybe we'll fire someone to save some money and get you to do their job as well. Group work if you know exactly how to do everything that the group needs to do. When starting a new job, it varies from job to job, but generally speaking, it takes time to learn the ropes. As soon as you act like you know what's going on, people will stop helping you and begin to expect more of you. When I was younger, my tendency was to dive in headfirst with a gung-ho attitude. "Oh, let me do it, I can handle it." I'm a bit more reserved these days. Unless I know that I can knock it out of the park, I don't step up. When salespeople come to the door or phone you, "Oh, I'm so sorry, my husband deals with all of this kind of thing. I don't understand. It's all so confusing. I don't have a husband." When negotiating for something. When the judge asks you why you stole all of the money. When someone wants help with their assignment and you know the right answers. When Pol Pot starts asking questions. You'd also do well to have good eyesight. If you pretend to be an idiot or ignorant, you can sometimes change the direction of the situation. For example, if a guy tells you to give him your money, say, "Sure." Take out your wallet, hand him a few bucks, and tell him "God bless," and then just walk away. When going through TSA in an airport. I'm autistic, though obviously high-functioning enough to be on the internet and to fly in an aircraft by myself, but airports in general make the autism a lot worse, and render me non-verbal, so I have to type everything on a phone and show it to people. I can't begin to tell you how many times I've just been waved through the TSA line without anything, and then given a direct ride to my gate or something like that. I guess it's not completely pretending because it is true to a point, but typing out, "I have autism, please be patient" on a phone and sticking it in a TSA agent's face seems to translate to, "I'm mentally challenged and no possible threat. Let me pass without any security measures." So the narrator was of two minds about putting this piece of advice on the internet, but it is interesting and it does pertain to the topic, so any potential villains, please don't do this. Thank you. When you're a woman and a guy likes you and is going to buy you something. All the time, to be honest. Any hearsay or opinions or money matters between multiple family members. Play dumb and walk away. In prison or among criminals, not a good idea to stand out being seen as overly intellectual. When you want someone to think they're smarter than you. I shamelessly played dumb as a white girl who found myself in a redneck bar. When the locals started getting rowdy and saying stupid crap, I got the frick out as quickly, gracefully, and low-key as I could before I outed myself as having a brain. When some wise guy from Jersey asks you what you saw as he lets you out of the trunk. George W. Bush did it for 8 years and became president off that facade. Pretty darn smart of him because it worked. People think he's legitimately stupid. When your country's despot leader is hunting down intellectuals. When you work for a government entity, being proactive here just gets you in trouble. Whenever traveling overseas and you get into trouble. As an American, I often played the "I'm an ignorant American, I didn't know I needed a ticket to ride the train." I got out of so many fines this way. Don't judge me, I was in school and I had very little money. When third world police are trying to shake you down for no reason. When you got caught doing something you're not supposed to, it's easier to say, "Sorry, I didn't know," than "I knew it was wrong, but I did it anyway." When smart people are getting purged. I act stupid by default. No point in showing your cards, right? People expect less of you. They aren't intimidated by you and therefore they can feel more open with you. At a poker table, I sat down being the only female in the room and pretended not to know a few things. It was digital poker where you play and bet against others, but the dealer is just the computer. Asked, "How do I see my cards?" You had to cup your hands over them on the table, and had trouble setting up the login. Everyone saw me as easy prey. I made $550 that day. Your first day in prison. Mouth shut, ears, eyes wide open. It's almost always smart to pretend to be stupid. Smart people are almost universally detested. If you really are smart, you don't want to let the other monkeys catch wind of it until you have an escape plan. When a cute girl asks about your educational background. My husband knows how to fix the cars, so I see no point in me retaining that knowledge. I know the basics in case something happens and I'm alone, but I'll never let him know that, and I'll never want to take a lesson from him again. When you're being interrogated by the police, until you're represented by a lawyer, say nothing. Remain completely mute and ignorant of any information they try to pry out of you, save your name and the desire for representation. When you realize you're by far the smartest in a group of people. When the IRS audits your tax return and asks if you realized that the deductions you listed were not legitimate. Counting cards in a casino. When a child tells you all about something you already know. Be engaged, show them that you're listening, encourage them when they falter. Plus, sometimes it's just refreshing to see things with a child's eyes. If you can't make time then and there, always be willing to revisit. When your joke about not knowing what a potato is goes wrong. When someone makes an overtly racist, sexist, or homophobic joke or comment, act like you just don't get it and get them to explain it over and over, highlighting their own bigotry and stupidity. When you're locked in a room with 5 other people and the last one alive that solves a puzzle gets to go free. You want everyone to want you to be the last one they have to go up against to live. What's the most stupid rule you've been expected to abide by? In my sophomore year of high school, our old principal got a promotion to the district office. He was replaced by someone who had literally just moved to the area and knew next to nothing of the well-established culture of our small town. After a few weeks, he noticed a problem around the campus. He saw many people wearing purple and gold in copious amounts and in ridiculous ways every Friday, and he was sure it had to be related to gang involvement. Rather than ask anyone about it, he called an emergency assembly in which he lectured us about the seriousness of the issue. He informed us that from that point on, if anyone were to wear either of these colors at school, they'd be put in detention for the remainder of the day, and their parent or guardian would have to come and pick them up. People laughed and rebelled, wearing more purple and gold on more days, and the detention room was overflowing almost every day. 2 months later, he found out that purple and gold were our school colors. People were dressing up like that on Fridays to show support and pride for whatever sports team had a game that day, as was the tradition of our town for the past 60 years. To show how stupid he felt, he called another emergency assembly to apologize, to which he wore a purple and gold clown suit and a dunce cap. In 5th grade, my friend and I were walking through the mostly empty school to get to our bus at the end of the day. A teacher was walking in the opposite direction towards us and yelled at us to walk in a line. So we made a line, just the 2 of us, and walked like that to our bus. I went to a semi-boarding high school, about 10% of the students boarded, and new dorms were constructed while I was there. We had a big meeting and the principal said, "No mixed dorm rooms, we don't want anyone doing the deed." That's a bit paraphrased. One of the students stood up and said, "What about the gay kids? They get to do it?" So for about a month, the rule was no students of the opposite or same gender in your dorm room with the exception of your roommates. Honestly, given how conservative a lot of boarding schools are, I'm surprised that it actually affected the policy rather than them just brushing off the question. Now, I'm curious, are there hyper-liberal boarding schools? What does that even look like? I'm an EMS helicopter pilot. I fly with night vision goggles. Problem: the Federal Air Association rules for using night vision goggles state that the aircraft must also be equipped with a working radar altimeter. So if I'm flying over the Sierra Nevada mountains on a pitch-black night and the radar altimeter fails, legally I have to take the night vision goggles off. Elementary school in Canada. We were not allowed to form circles. During recess and such, as you get older, you kind of get into that whole, oh, look at me, I'm getting older and cooler, and I just stand around and talk with people instead of messing around in the snow, kind of thing. And apparently us forming circles was a safety hazard because supervising teachers couldn't see anything going on in the middle of the circle. I mean, God forbid, what if we were making a circle inside that circle? I once took a part-time job from a temp agency at Toys R Us distribution warehouse, where my job was to cut open boxes, place them on a pallet and put the pallet in the bottom of the stacks, which are large shelves. We were all just extra people they needed for the extra Christmas workload. I met all kinds of interesting people, including an elderly husband and wife who were farmers trying to make ends meet. Well, anyways, the one person in charge of us was an absolute C-word. She was a permanent Toys R Us employee. We were treated like crap. Oftentimes, we didn't have any boxes to cut open and were made to stand still at our tables. Large but low tables with 4 people to stand around. When standing here, we had to do nothing. If we moved around, or heaven forbid, if we sat down on the table, we were screamed at. I guess they thought if we were going to be paid for doing nothing that we should suffer for it. Like standing in one spot for up to 4 hours straight, which would absolutely kill my back. I've run into a lot of jobs where the rules seem to be just made to punish employees, oftentimes because of what some bad employee did in the past, and now all future employees have to pay for it. I worked at a Toys R Us store for Christmas as extra help stacking the empty shelves overnight. We had a rule that if there was nothing to do, you'd go to the warehouse in the back and drive around like a maniac in those little electric toy cars. I don't think this was official policy, though. At a previous job, I was instructed not to keep any document or email for longer than 6 months, and that my computer would be audited to ensure compliance. This included program source code. I was a programmer. Giving up my nail clippers at airport security. I fly the planes. I assume that it's preventing the highly plausible scenario in which, mid-flight with autopilot enabled, Pilot Paul nips off to the bathroom to do a quick spot of nail clipping. Meanwhile, an awful hijacker, who's had the audacity to not check the "I am a hijacker" box on the security sheet, sees this pedicure about to take place. As Pilot Paul is about to enter the bathroom and is at his most vulnerable, the terrorist leaps from his seat and wrestles Pilot Paul to the ground, stealing the nail clippers from him. Pilot Paul struggles valiantly to try and reclaim the nail clippers, but, as is taught in all good self-defense schools, when your opponent is armed, it's best to simply run away. Pilot Paul is fatally clipped in the jugular and dies a heroic death on the airplane floor. The hijacker fights his way up to the cockpit and swiftly unlocks the door with the pointy bit used to get dirt from the right corner of the nail there. He overpowers the co-pilot easily with the unfoldable nail file and switches the seatbelt light on. The passengers and crew take their seats and belt up. The hijacker is now in total control. I'm a system admin for a company that had a proposal to do some work for a large bank. They told us we needed to comply with their security procedures for data storage and mentioned the name of the document in an email. When we asked for a copy of the document so we could make sure we were compliant, we were told that we couldn't see it as it was an internal bank document and not allowed to be transmitted outside their network. In short, was told to comply with a security document we weren't allowed to see. I worked at Pizza Hut for a while. We got an order for 5 pepperoni pizzas. So I laid out 5 discs of dough, stretched them all, and then sauced them all. You know, the most efficient way to do it. The manager came over and said I was doing it wrong, that I had to make each pizza start to finish, place it in the oven, and then make the next one. I told him he was an idiot and kept doing it the efficient way. The general manager came in later and totally had my back. Christ, that's a pathetic victory. I have a similar Papa John's story. I had a manager who'd flip his crap if you lined up open boxes on the cutting table in preparation to put the pizzas in them as they were coming out of the oven. Long story short, one day we were slammed and he was chilling in his office, which had a window that could see the pizza cutting table. He was doing nothing, as usual, so I lined up about 4 to 5 boxes and he came flying out of the office and berating me. We exchange words and both end up in the owner's office where we explain our story and I'm visibly upset. I don't take getting yelled at by authority too well. The owner looks him dead square in the eye and says, "If she quits, you're fired." The manager left me the heck alone and let me do my job after that. I worked in daycare. We had classroom ratios. Say, one teacher must be in the room for every 5 children there. My new boss wanted us to call her when we needed to go to the bathroom and wait for her to come over and cover us for the time it took us to go pee. Okay, so this doesn't sound so bad, except we'd call her and she'd tell us to hold it, or she'd say that she was busy with something and she'd be there in a second. Then a half hour later, when we were slinking down the hall to the bathroom, she'd yell at us for being in the hall. She also wrote me up for being too loud. In daycare, I was singing songs to infants during circle time, and they were all sitting quietly and clapping. She was crazy. Didn't happen to me personally, but my sister is severely mentally and physically handicapped, wheelchair-bound, and frequently has health issues or doctor's appointments, which inevitably lead to many missed classes. Despite this, we've gotten countless phone calls and messages on the machine informing us that my sister has earned an in-school suspension for her missed classes. Seems like a great way to get your school sued, or at least in the newspaper, and not for any good reason. My lord, what a merciless bunch of disillusioned teachers must have been in charge there. I wasn't allowed to watch PG-13 or higher movies, or the book, comic, game equivalents until I moved out of my parents' house at age 19. Additionally, I wasn't allowed to have my computer in my room. Not entirely unreasonable. The weird thing about that is that it kept being true after I got married and was just visiting them. If you think that's bad, I have a friend who, at 19, his parents would make him hook up a box to their TV if they want to watch anything over a G rating. This box would monitor the closed captioning, and if it saw a bad word, and we're talking mild language here, such as the common word for doing the deed, it would mute the TV show and show the closed captioning on the screen, but it would replace the bad word. I watched a movie over there once, and only once. Not me, but I went to high school with a guy who had very overprotective, stereotypical Asian parents. He then went to college a 5-hour drive away from his folks and lived at college. So when he was away for all his parents knew, he could have been doing light snow and going to adult clubs 5 nights a week. But when he came home for holidays, he had to be in before it got dark out, even when he was over 21. When Batman Begins came out, his parents only let him go to see it with me and some friends because we lied to him for his own good, and I said my mom was driving us to the theater. We were all over 21 at this point. In short, friends' parents made him be home before it got dark every night, and only let him go to see a movie when he was 21 because they thought my mom was going with us. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below, and if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. In schools, if someone tries to fight you and you don't want to, you can't even defend yourself. The rule is if you throw a punch or perform any kind of violent act, you've consented to the fight. Are you a 140-pound freshman about to be killed by a senior? Did you hit them once in self-defense but got sent to the hospital? Well, guess what, kiddo? You've got 5 days out of school suspension. And we also have in our rulebook the penalties for setting off a bomb. Is that necessary? I worked at a zoo and we weren't allowed to use the word evolution. In high school, I left campus after class and got some ice cream. I came back 20 minutes later to meet with my teacher for help on calculus. When I walked into campus, I was stopped by one of the ladies on yard duty who informed me that I'm not allowed to come back on campus after leaving. I explained to her that I was coming back for tutoring, but she didn't care. Long story short, she took me to the admin office and turned me in. They gave her weird looks and told her what I was doing was completely fine. I had to wear an aerial harness to climb a 6-foot ladder. When I was in primary school, about 7 or so, I remember that we weren't permitted to eat Mother Nature lunch bars because they promoted paganism. I ate them every day. Back in high school, our then Dean of Students, a woman who literally carried around a ruler to see if girls' skirts were too short, tried to bring about a rule where girls had to have sleeved dresses at school dances. That rule didn't last long, as in before the next school dance. One of the female teachers, a 35-year-old, told her that after spending the weekend going to different stores, there was not a single sleeved dress that either she or a 16-year-old would want to buy. Half the school would have been in detention if they hadn't taken out that rule. As a guy, I would have deeply considered purchasing and wearing a sleeveless dress to the dance, before chickening out and not going at all. The company I used to work at told us that our emails didn't work externally, and that we could only email each other. It was total rubbish and everyone knew it. We could email our friends and families at any time, but we had to pretend like nobody actually knew. That's 200 people in the office hiding a secret because the IT guys weren't actually IT guys and had no idea how to set up an internal messaging system. Oh, those IT guys knew. They also thought it was a dumb rule and just let email through rather than block it and have to listen to people complain. At a private school I went to, it was mandatory for all boys to wear ties on Wednesdays. If you didn't wear one, you were sent home to get one. Well, one day I forgot. Luckily, I was blessed with the ingenuity of MacGyver that day and made a tie out of a long piece of paper towel. It worked for a couple of hours until some absolute jerks in my class pointed it out. Apparently, paper is not an acceptable material for ties. I was sent home. I once worked at a Chinese restaurant where if you forgot to put the rice on the table's order, white or brown rice, which were free, the owner expected you to buy the entire table's meal out of your paycheck. It happened to me once in the 6 months I was there, and they told me to pay the $50 tab for the table. I told them that if they enforced that rule, I'd walk out in the middle of service. They didn't enforce the rule. In my elementary school, a few times a week, they'd take the brightest students and put them in a class 1 or 2 grade levels higher to help teach maturity. I was finished with my work. Grade 4, I was put into a grade 6 class, and I didn't have anything to do, so I started doing the other class work. After I finished, I went to the teacher and asked if I'd done it correctly and proceeded to be chastised for the next 30 minutes. Apparently, there's some taboo on challenging yourself. When I was in high school, there was a rule that students were not allowed to grow facial hair of any form. If a student tried to grow facial hair or just plain didn't have time to shave before getting to class, which started at 7 a.m., he was sent to the disciplinary office, scolded by the vice principal, and forced to shave with a single-bladed disposable razor and no shaving cream. Multiple of my friends faced this punishment. I asked several teachers why this rule was in effect, and most of them simply stated that they didn't know. I got one answer out of the dozen teachers I asked, and that was, "It's so that the students don't look like they're older and get mistaken for faculty. This would allow them to roam the halls and not get sent back to class." To which I could only respond with, "Why don't you just learn what your co-workers look like?" The football coach was not happy with me after that. Now, to be fair to the coach, I've also had jobs where I've hated everyone I've worked with, and didn't want to do anything more with any of them than was absolutely necessary. But in defense of the author, who's mistaking a teen for faculty? I was homeschooled through high school, and when I was applying to schools, I had this conversation with a local college's admission folks. They said, "Okay, and we'll need a copy of your high school transcript." I don't have one, I was homeschooled. "Okay, well, we'll still need a transcript." "Right, but I don't actually have one." "Well, we need a transcript to let you in, so you'll have to send us one. You do realize that no such thing actually exists, so I'm going to have to make something up." "That's fine." Not mine, but at my friend's work. Not allowed to download Firefox because it's not secure. The main browser was Internet Explorer 6. To show school support when the school song was played, students would link arms and sway side to side. We got a new principal who immediately banned swaying due to its, quote, suggestive nature. Any student caught swaying will be suspended. And we were. This was 1972. He was fired in 1973. In 2002, my oldest child had this weird substitute teacher in one of her high school classes. She commented about strange rules and his bad attitude. When she said his name, all I could do was laugh. It was my old principal. We weren't allowed to talk at lunch in the cafeteria, grades 6 through 8. Years 7 through 11 in the academy I go to, we have to wear these thick black blazers year-round, and you're not allowed to take them off for any reason except science experiments and art. In 2009, there was a mini heat wave and we still weren't allowed to take off our blazers. Many detentions were given that week for taking off the blazers so we wouldn't get too hot. Oh boy, I sympathize. My last job required me to wear slacks, a thick cotton dress shirt, company provided, and a tie. You had to wear this every shift, even if it was 100 degrees outside and you were unloading the truck. Even sweating your butt off in the heat wasn't nearly as bad as getting drenched unloading trucks in the rain. Uniforms are supposed to make everyone look neat and tidy. No one looks neat and tidy dripping wet from sweat or drenched in rain. People who swear by dress codes should be forced to sit in a sauna wearing all that heavy clothing. A friend of mine said he had to deal with crap like this until one day when a coworker keeled over from heat exhaustion and turned around and sued the place for endangering his life. After that, if the news said it was going to be really hot out, they could dress down for the day. Sad that it took that for them to change, though. No Linux in high school because it was classified as a hacking tool. I went to a Catholic school from 1st grade to 8th grade, so you can just imagine how many absolutely ridiculous rules we had to follow. But I think the worst was when we got a male principal and he made a rule that we were no longer allowed to wear shorts under our skirts. At the time, I was only upset about it because it made no sense to me, since no one could even see the shorts. But once I got older, I realized just how sick it was. You know, I think I'd have told my kids to wear the shorts, and to call me and tell me every time someone reported one of them for wearing the shorts. I was on vacation with my girlfriend at the time, and her dad had a no peeing standing up rule. Literally, I wasn't allowed to pee standing up in his house. He said this to me at the beginning of the vacation, and I thought he meant to make sure that the toilet seat was down after I used it, since he only had daughters and wanted to protect them or something. So one time when I was peeing standing up as any man would, my girlfriend's mum says from outside the door that she can hear someone peeing while standing up. Still taking this as a joke, I admitted that it was me. I then got a 30-minute lecture on how I should obey his rules and not do that. Still one of my biggest what the frick moments in a relationship. I was never given the true reason for this rule. He said something about protecting his daughters, maybe not wanting to hear a man peeing or something. I wasn't really paying attention during his lecture, so most of it went over my head. I listened to him lecture me because he was a military man, my girlfriend's parents, and already hated everything I did, and I didn't want to cause any more problems. Don't smoke green herb, the federal government. It's okay, you can smoke here, California. At my high school, when someone was late, they'd just have the teacher mark tardy on their computer. Most students were never more than a minute late. They just couldn't get to class fast enough and would walk in 30 seconds late or so. Our principal had the brilliant idea of instead having a tardy table all the way across the school where students would go, line up, and register as being tardy. If you were late at the class, the teacher would send you to the tardy table instead of just marking you late themselves. Instead of having a teacher mark the 1 or 2 people who showed up tardy to their class, you had late students from all classes lining up to register as tardy with only one person to process them at said table. The result was students ending up 15 to 30 minutes late to class because they were waiting in line to register. Parents weren't pleased, but the principal insisted that it would reduce the number of students who were late overall. I'm not sure if they kept it or not. The tardy table was started just a few months before I quit school. Public schools always have the dumbest rules, though. If you make the shape of a pistol with your index finger and thumb, it's zero tolerance. You bully the gay kid and it's meh, whatever. My high school's cafeteria was way too small to legally hold all of the students for fire code reasons. For this reason, I'd eat lunch in the band room. My senior year, they cracked down on this. The principal called an assembly and announced that all students would be required to spend the lunch period in the cafeteria. At this point, I stood up and said, "Do you realize that would require exceeding the legal capacity of the cafeteria, breaking the law, and putting student safety at risk?" The principal responded with, "Well, sometimes you have to make do with what you have." What's life like as a teen parent? I'm 35 and have a 16 and 14-year-old. They're pretty good kids overall. I mean, they're rotten teenagers, but that's to be expected. It's pretty cool that I can still do stuff with them and not seem so out of place. We are, however, the youngest parents at our school, which is kind of odd for both us and the kids sometimes. So my mum had me when she was 18. I'm now 18 and she's 36. She looks like she hasn't aged in 10 years and everyone thinks we're sisters. My dad, on the other hand, looks like he could either be my dad or, when we go out drinking, possibly my sugar daddy. We go to bars sometimes and I never get carded. I find it very easy to empathize with the things my kid is going through because high school wasn't that long ago for me, and I can remember very clearly what it was like. Also, having seen me struggle through my 20s as a young mum has definitely set her on a different path. She's a women's shelter volunteer, an honor roll student, and has plans to go into law enforcement. My mum is 35 and I'm 19. She's definitely more in the know than my friends' parents when it comes to pop culture, and sometimes I feel like she's more wild than I am because she never had a chance to get it out of her system when she was my age. Based on what she's told me, having a child saved her future, and we're really close. Move ahead a generation. When I graduated high school, my parents were in their early to mid-30s. My dad was 16 when I was born. To me, a stupid 17-year-old, I thought my parents were old people. I was 34 when my first child was born. I can't wrap my head around that stuff. It's definitely fun to go somewhere with your kid once they've grown up and watch as our weird society thinks you're a couple. I know a very attractive young woman in her early 20s. I mean, she's so pretty that she turns heads wherever she goes. She's even done some modeling work. Anyway, she's told me that whenever she's out in public with her dad, they get dirty looks from middle-aged women who think that she's her dad's trophy girlfriend and not his daughter. The middle-aged men, on the other hand, will sometimes nod in approval and give him a thumbs up. And both points of that last commenter make me sad for two different reasons. Be less judgmental, middle-aged ladies, and be less gross, middle-aged men. Today is actually my daughter's 20th birthday. I'm 38. It's weird for people like us because we didn't have the same life most people did. Like from the time I was 18 years old, I had the responsibility of someone else's life. Most of my friends were out partying and being selfish, in a good way, to clarify, and living their own life, and mine was focused on providing a good life for my daughter. I knew I didn't want any more kids, and now she's an adult, it's great. I got to experience the stuff that goes along with being a parent, but I'm 38 and the hard work is done. I have lots of friends just now starting to have kids. Screw that. As others noted, it was always weird being in between. Among my peers, I was always ahead because I was already a parent going to softball games on Sunday morning instead of nursing a hangover. Okay, sometimes it was both. But all the other parents were way older than me. Walking into my first parent-teacher conferences, I felt like I was going to get into trouble. Also, it leads to some weird situations. I used to go geocaching with her on the weekends, and I can remember some old lady grilling me because I was a 24-year-old guy walking out into the woods with a 6-year-old girl. And of course nobody thinks, oh, you're her dad. I also had to bust up a house party that she threw in her mum's foreclosed house when she was about 17. I walked in and looked around for her, and nobody had the sense to realize that I was a parent. It wasn't until I started screaming, "Everyone, get the frick out of here before the cops get in," that they realized that I wasn't there to chill. Though I have to admit, I was pretty proud. They'd blacked out all the windows so no light was coming outside, and they had a full-on DJ with a sound stack. 17-year-old me would have loved that party. I married into a pre-made family that made me a grandfather at the age of 39. My wife's oldest child had a child as a teenager herself. By my mid-40s, I had 4 grandchildren. Personally, I didn't like being a parent, I didn't feel like I was good at it, and didn't find any satisfaction or enjoyment there. So the teen years were difficult. My 2 oldest had significant behavioral issues, and my oldest has spent years in prison a couple of times for different substance trafficking, and many more years in juvie for other crimes. Theft and malicious mischief kind of things. However, I love being a grandparent. It's been a complete paradigm shift for me. I don't really know why, but I enjoy spending time with my grandkids, and I offer to babysit fairly often. And I feel like I'm young enough now to really enjoy the kids without being the old man. I make enough money now to spoil them, have plenty of vacation time to go to the zoo or Disneyland or pretty much whatever I want. My relationship with my 2 younger kids has significantly improved, but the oldest is still in prison and completely unwilling to take responsibility for his actions and the danger that he presents to his children, so that relationship is still strained. I'm 37 with a 16 and 14-year-old and a 9-year-old too. It's awesome being my age with teenagers. I have tons of energy compared to some of my older counterparts. When I coach my kids' youth volleyball, basketball, or soccer teams, I can still get on the field and play with them. I absolutely love schooling teenagers. Teachers are usually friendlier to us because they see us as similarly aged. I feel for my friends that are now dealing with their ticking biological clock and fretting about marriage and babies. The biggest negative has been trying to find and develop worthwhile friendships. Most parents tend to create friendships of convenience that center around the age of their kids. Thus, we often feel left out because we're still pretty young and active, and we don't fit the mold of the typical parents of a 16-year-old. While we didn't initially plan to be parents as teenagers, I don't regret it at all. Also, I look forward to 7 years from now when my kids will be out of high school and we'll be 44-year-old empty nesters. A few years ago, when my great-grandmother was still alive, we were able to get a photo with 5 generations of women and baby women in it. Each had a kid before 18. It's pretty sweet, actually. My son is 14 and he's almost 3 inches taller than me now, and I'm the cool mum to all of his friends. He's a really good kid and involved in anything and everything he puts his mind to. I often feel like it's the payback for enduring the amount of crap society threw my way when I got pregnant with him in high school. Teachers wanting me to drop out, principal not wanting me to walk with my class, because apparently it would look bad for the morale. Screw your morale. I graduated high school and college with honors. My son knows my history and knows what he needs to keep it from repeating. He is, though, above all, my son. He knows that too. Yeah, man, frick the school system. When I was pregnant, I was trying to move my class schedule around and the guidance counselor said, well, it's not like you're going to graduate anyways. I graduated with the 2nd highest marks in my class. I am the teen baby. I can honestly say that my mum is the best woman I have ever or will ever meet. I'm 18 now and had a wonderful childhood. She worked her butt off for me and gave me everything I ever wanted. I know this didn't really answer the question, I just had to give a shout out to my mum. Honestly, so far the accounts have all been weighted a lot more towards the positive than the narrator was expecting. It's actually kind of inspiring that so many young parents seem to be able to come through for their kids in the face of societal expectations and support healthy, functional families. I'm sure that there are other cases too, just like older people with kids. We might hear from some more of the negative cases soon. Not yet 30, but my husband is. I'm 27. We had our first child when I was 16 and he was 18. He's 11 and has that preteen thing going on. We've been married 11 years and have a 10, 7, and 2-year-old as well. It's definitely weird sometimes because most of our friends are running around with 1 or maybe 2 toddlers and our oldest daughter is already wearing a training bra. Some cool things, though, are that we're still young and still cool to her in some ways. We like video games and modern music. However, if I even remotely dance or hint at dancing, I get the, "Oh my god, Mum, you're so old, that's so embarrassing," thing. She occasionally tells us how old and decrepit we are, her words, not mine, but she also tells us how old her friends' parents are in ways like, "So-and-so's parents are so old, like 45, and old like Nana." I'm 59, my daughter is 42, and has a 21-year-old daughter who has a little boy who's 2, making me a great-grandmother for frick's sake. Unbelievable. This early motherhood string is unique in my family going back to the mid-18th century, so we're not living in a van down by the river or anything. I'm a professional person, as are both of my children. Having a child at 17 isn't optimal, but it worked out for me. I delayed going back to school till my children were in high school. That was my choice, and it won't be right for everyone. The very best thing about having children young is youth itself. Not only was I young enough to play and run and crawl around the floor, my son was born when I was 21, and wake up the next day to do it again all over, I was 37 when I became a grandmother. I was young enough then to have more fun with my grandchildren than many people are, and I took full advantage of the opportunity. This new one, the 2-year-old, pushes my endurance envelope in ways the previous 2 generations didn't. Would I change any of it if I could go back to when I was 16 and not pregnant? Not if it meant missing having these specific people in my life. It's tough though. It's not all Sesame Street and applesauce, but the good parts are breathtaking. I've lived to love 7 descendants and each one is unique and irreplaceable. Sometimes I forget how full and crazy and happy and loud and joyous my life has been so far until I explain it to someone else, so thanks for listening. I am the product of a teenage mum. I could have gone the same way since it seemed to be a pattern on my mum's side, but given my upbringing, I knew what I didn't want. My mum and stepdad and that whole situation pretty much showed me what not to do, as it did with at least one of my 2 sisters. The jury is still out on the littlest sister. So far so good though. That said, I was still young when I had my oldest. I was almost 23. I'd married my high school sweetheart and we just felt that kids were naturally the next step. I don't really mind that I have kids a bit older than my friends' kids. My oldest will be 13 this year and it's killing me a little each day that goes by closer to his birthday. I'll turn 36 shortly after. I'm happy for him to be more and more independent, but I'm still saddened that he'll officially be a teenager this year. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I was 19, my wife was 18. Kids are now 25 and 21. My son just graduated Navy Nuclear Power School, regarded as one of the most difficult curriculums in the world, and my daughter is married and not having kids. So, sitting at 44 and 42, we're empty nesters, less of our two crazy Frenchies. Life is good, man. I've known someone like this, and one of their friends tried for a mother-daughter ménage à trois. It didn't work. While I'm sure this scenario is in plenty of adult videos, I highly doubt the actors are actually mother and daughter. So it sounds like your friend is just kind of a prevert. I got pregnant at 19 and gave birth 2 months after I turned 20. I'm 29 with a 9-year-old now. I'm the youngest mum at my kiddo's school, but it's only because it's at a beach city and it's quite pricey to live here. I'm sure if I went inland, I would meet younger parents. It's pretty awesome that when I'm 38 I'll be done raising kids, provided I don't have any more. It's nice to have a 9-year-old because I wake up most mornings with a cup of coffee that she brewed and put honey and milk in for me. We get our nails done together and she's like a little best friend. She's ridiculously well behaved, and I'm just so happy that I refused to have an operation to get rid of her like at least 5 people suggested and 2 offered to pay for. Her dad owes just under 60 grand in support. He was 19 too, and he handled it badly. Anyway, it's awesome having a preteen at 29 because she's like my little buddy and she lights up my life. Not quite teens, but I took my sons, who were aged 20 and 24 at the time, on my stag do to Amsterdam where I was 41. My ex had my eldest when I was just 17. It was a group of 20 of us, including my sons, and was so much fun and totally hilarious. I will say that I thought my kids would have seen that it's not easy having kids early, and I was always open and honest to them about the things that you give up having children whilst being young yourself. My oldest son took this on board, and he's waited to start his family. But sadly, last year my 16-year-old son had a child with a girl he's no longer with. We're totally supportive, but I can't help but feeling a little sad that he's sacrificed his own childhood. And it may be more difficult today, given that you need approximately 4 degrees to get any job that can support a family. But then again, maybe just like some of these stories are stories of unexpected triumph against societal expectations, maybe the Zoomers could surprise us. I wish them all the best, I really do. When I was 19, I had my son. You think you'd be generationally closer to them? There's a chasm between a 14-year-old and a 33-year-old today. I feel it's wider than between 14-year-old me and 33-year-old me, mostly due to technology. The years have not been kind, but it's sort of a blessing that I can pass as early 40s. I don't get as much stigma as I used to when he was younger from teachers and scout leaders. I also have 2 small kids. I love them dearly, but I'll be the parent of an under 18-year-old for almost 30 years. I had my son when I was 15. He's 14 now and I'm 29. Everyone thinks we're siblings. I look younger than my age and most people think I'm between 21 and 25, so that doesn't help either. Most of his friends' parents are well into their 50s, so I don't exactly hang out with them or know them very well. I've had people question whether I'm his parent or not, mainly because I'm younger. We'll probably get confused for girlfriend and boyfriend when he's in his 20s. Both my kiddos were accidents. I love my sons nonetheless, but turning 30 this year, and if my kiddos move out when they're 18 to 20 years old, being early to mid-40s will be glorious. Do people really think that their kids will move out at 18? I'm 26 and at least half of my friends my age still live with their parents, because rent and housing prices are ridiculous. I mean, I'm a very independent person, so my parents are kind of free to do whatever they want. But I often wonder if people expecting their kids to move out at 18 and never come back are a little bit naive. Housing and student loans are not decreasing in price. Stepdad here, but my wife had her first of 2 children at 19 and is a few years older than me, so now I'm a 30-year-old with a 14-year-old boy. For some context, I've been living with them for 5 years and I've been around them most of the time for 6. It's wild. Sometimes I kick butt as a dad, and sometimes I feel like I blow it. That's probably par for the course for parenting. For what it's worth, I don't have a lot in common with my teenage son, but a little more with my stepdaughter, who's a couple of years younger. It probably helps that I've been around for half her life as well. Not that my relationship with my son is bad, but we have to compromise to hang out. I've never been a video game person, so we'll do something like play Halo together, because he likes it and I'll struggle to play, and he'll struggle with me sucking up the mission so much. I'm also not sure that at 30 I'm ready to be challenged by a teenager in the way they typically challenge you. So I try my best to be real and honest and just listen. Also, I look young as it is, so it is hard forming a relationship with the other parents. Usually I get pegged as a much older sibling. Sometimes I feel like I lost the last half of my 20s. I'd like to have traveled more, had more time to pursue hobbies, and enjoy my money when I started earning it. It feels like half of my money goes to groceries because of my teenage son. While I can provide a middle-class life for my kids at this age, my biggest regret is that I'm probably not going to be equipped to help with college a whole lot, if at all. I still won't have reached my peak earning potential. On the flip side, they'll be adults earning for themselves by the time I'm 40. I'm really excited to relax and do adult things with my kids. They're good kids, and I think and hope they'll be good adults with solid values. I think it'll be a lot of fun to do silly things and throw down a few beers. I have to be so serious with them sometimes. Meanwhile, I'm less than 10 years out of college, and I did some funny stuff in my 20s. They think I'm old, and they don't even know. Finally, a topic that I'm qualified to comment on. I had my daughter when I was 17, and she was always proud that people mistook me for an older sister. She wasn't a rotten teen, and I'm not sure why. I certainly made enough mistakes parenting her. She's 28 now, and we're very close. I'm 32 with 14-year-old twins. It's weird. People who meet me at work or other places away from my kids assume that when I talk about my kids, I mean young kids, like under 10. The first time a new coworker heard my son on the phone, she genuinely thought it was a man calling me and that I was just messing with her, saying that it was my teenage son. I'm also told I look about 25 to 27 rather than 32, so that adds to it. At school or sport functions, people sometimes think I'm the aunt or the older sister rather than the mum. Sometimes, meeting another parent, I can definitely see that they're trying to figure out how old I am. Did I have them as a teenager, or do I just look really good for my age? And how old I must have been when they were born. It's a little awkward making small talk with people who are 10 to 20 years older than me all the time, but sometimes it does work. One of my best parent friends is a woman in her late 60s raising her grandson. My kids, especially my 11-year-old daughter, are a little self-conscious about my age. My twins are boys, and I know they'd sooner die rather than tell me this, but I think there's been a few "the twins' mum is hot" kind of things at school for them. I also took all of my kids into a coffee place. I normally stop into this place alone on my way to work, and the barista made a big fuss over not thinking I was old enough for these to be my kids, and my 11-year-old just about died of embarrassment. I got pregnant with my oldest at 17 and gave birth to her at 18. I had my second kid at 23 and my youngest at 25. I'm 40 now, so the kids are 22, 17, and 15. I love being a young mother. I had energy and enthusiasm. I wasn't nearly as cynical, and I had more patience. When I was in my 30s, I had a teenager, a preteen, and one just a bit younger. My friends and neighbors were just starting their families and were dealing with sleepless nights, spit up, and child-proofing the whole block. I was happy to be past all of that mess. I'm 32 and my wife is 36. We have a 16-year-old, an 8-year-old, a 4-year-old, and a newborn. I'll be honest, having a new baby at this age is exhausting. Yeah, it was scary the first time around, but we had the energy to cope back then. It does help though that they're all great kids. I have to work pretty hard, anywhere up to 90 hours a week, to keep up with the bills, but it allows my wife to stay at home, so the kids have always got one parent around at all times. My father died when I was 7, so hopefully I'll have more years with my kids than I did with my own dad. If I could give any new parents one piece of advice, buy a dining table. It's probably the most important thing in our house. Being able to sit down and eat together as a family is what keeps us all sane. Story from the other side, I'm 16 and my mum is 31. Her family completely wrote her off and didn't talk to her for years. My dad is 32, and his family was super psyched about having a baby. We lived with his parents until about 5 years ago when my dad finally got his degree. I actually like having these young parents because they have tons of energy to do things with me that I've never seen any of my friends' parents doing. My wife and I are in our mid-30s and we have 3 teenagers, 17, 14, and 14. Not twins, just different marriages. Our oldest graduates this year and I'm excited for her to become an adult and start college. In 4 more years, my kids will all be in college and we'll be empty nesters. I'll be 40 and for some reason that makes me feel awesome because we'll have a long time to enjoy our middle years without kids. Obviously, we'll always be there for our kids as they go through adulthood, but now we can go travel and not have to worry about what we're going to do with all these kids. Snipers. What do movies and pop culture misrepresent about your job? Being a sniper essentially boils down to your being incredibly uncomfortable at all times. You should learn to love being cold, wet, and generally having an overall terrible quality of life while you're operating. Firstly, physically getting to the objective is absolutely brutal and is probably the worst part of the job. Often you'll be laden down with about 200 pounds of gear and specialized equipment, including water, food, ammo, weapons, and radios or batteries, which you'll have to carry silently through the night for several miles in the worst terrain you can find before you even get to the office to work. Once you spend however many hours or days suffering while getting there, you'll have to set up a hide site for your team. There are a ton of variations on splitting up hide sites or different hide styles that you may feel compelled to use depending on the situation. You'll probably want to get your hide built and loaded before the sun comes up, or you're going to have a bad time. Most media portrays snipers as working alone or in pairs at most, but real-world sniper teams are usually 6 to 8 guys switching out team roles for the duration of the mission. Certain aspects of team composition and equipment will vary from branch to branch and between units, but most teams should include a team leader, assistant team leader, someone with a heavy weapon, a radio operator, a corpsman/medic, and a slackman or flex spot. Unless your team leader is terrible and doesn't train his guys, everyone in the team should confidently be able to take over anyone else's job at any point and continue operating. Everyone should also know how to use every weapon in the team, regardless of their own assigned billet. Other shooters and spotters can be added if you need more bodies, but the general goal is to maintain as small a footprint as possible out in the landscape. Often we'd be at the team leader's discretion with how he wished to distribute his team and their loadouts. Obviously, the situation will dictate this to a degree as well, and you may swap out the weapons and equipment depending on what you expect to encounter or engage. Most media also tends to leave out how meticulous snipers are when they clean up or leave their hide sites. An enormous amount of effort is put into not leaving behind target indicators that could possibly get your teammates killed or injured, or potentially poison the well for operating in that area in the future. Nobody should ever know that a decent sniper team was operating in the area if they do everything right. There you go, there's apparently less lone wolf stuff than a lot of us are led to believe, and these squads of highly trained professional unalivers rely on super competent military equivalents of a middle manager to see them through it all. Former Marine grunt here, STA or Surveillance and Target Acquisition Platoon is not nearly as glorious as people think it is. Actually, shooting targets is a fairly small part of their overall skill set. Their primary mission is recon and observation. The reality of sniping is less waiting around to shoot a high-value target. The reality is usually snooping your way into an observation post under cover of darkness, building a hide that you must remain almost completely still in 99% of the time, going number 1 and number 2 in plastic bags, and making sure you leave no trash behind to give the enemy any idea you were ever there. Then, after a few days of this crap existence, you quietly and sneakily break down your hide to snoop your way back out. Now, that being said, I know a few guys when I was in, and there are some well-known stories about them stacking some serious bodies, but those guys are generally the exception, not the rule. The boredom. It's a little like golf, lots of practice and repetition. On the other hand, you get really good at estimating wind speed, distance, and elevation. Having a good spotter kills time. Lots of Archer and Super Troopers references, lots of movie quotes. I bet the Archer quote is always, "Big whoop, I'm spooning a Barrett 50 caliber. I could kill a building." According to Eric Haney, the sniper in Delta Force, one of 2 things can psychologically happen to a sniper. 1, you become emotionally attached to your target after watching them for hours and can't pull the trigger when the time comes. 2, the power of watching a person dissolve in a cloud of red mist makes you feel powerful, and you want to go on a spree. Usually in fiction, the sniper is either alone or is with a spotter that's less experienced. In reality, the spotter is usually the more experienced in the team. The spotter chooses the target and does calculations to account for distance, atmospheric conditions, among other things. I'm not a sniper per se, but I am a long-range shooter. When you're running big calibers and you send a round, the recoil is going to make you lose the view in the scope. Rarely are you going to watch the round impact through the scope. 17 HMR most can, and with a 22 long rifle and WMR I can as well. Depending on the rifle, 223 sometimes you can keep an eye on it, but for the most part you lose visual. It can also depend on the scope and the magnification. Confirming the target is down is one of the duties of the spotter. While the spotter is doing calculations, the sniper is watching the target. The spotter pretty much does all of the calculations for the shot, and the sniper is just there to pull the trigger. In most cases, the spotter is more experienced than the guy on the rifle. Howard Wasden in his book talking about being a sniper in Somalia. He was protecting some helicopters coming in and grabbing suspects, and he saw someone come around a building with an RPG, and he ended up putting a round in the guy's face. He made a point of saying that in movies the bullets always knock him over, but in real life the bullets suck them in. Also, back at base, when everyone was congratulating him on protecting them and getting a headshot, he made sure not to tell them that he wasn't aiming for his head. It takes a great deal more patience. A couple of minutes of spotting target in film is almost always a couple of hours in real life. You have to nearly meditate, but be ready to act at a moment's notice. Excitement is the enemy. Icy calm rules the day. You can do everything right and still miss, especially at a great distance or when the wind is active. Doubly so if both are factors. Spotters are a part of it, whereas in the film, the lone wolf is frequently the communicated image. Even if you're content to do the job, erasing life can wear on you, because rarely, if ever, in modern day are you fighting a war that involves your nation's very survival, as was the case in past wars. Now you're just punching tickets in most cases. Unless you lack humanity, it's not enjoyable. Oh, and you don't pull triggers, you squeeze them. It's boring, punctuated by a brief time passage, so intense it feels like you've aged years. For some reason they made one of the bad guys from Lethal Weapon a sniper, but they were also an albino. Albinos have poor eyesight. I guess it's more of a misrepresentation of albinos. In real life, there's no respawn. Probably no lag either. This topic needed a serious notes-only addendum so that people like me don't post about how good we are at sniping auctions on eBay. I don't think they ever show the actors wearing diapers because they can't get up to take a leak when sneaking along in a ghillie suit. I was on a roof in Iraq. There was a crap ton of people walking in the street below me and I couldn't really move. I had to whiz like a motherfricker and just happened to find this little tube beside me, so I whizzed in it in an attempt to keep the wee off me. It started pouring back towards me and I had to push dirt to create a little makeshift dam to stop it. Another time I was trying to go in a bottle and I got stuck in the bottle with a suction effect. That one hurt. I'm not a crazed shooter, Dad, I'm an assassin. Well, the difference being one's a job and the other's a mental sickness. The narrator would like to thank the sniper from Team Fortress 2 for taking time out of his busy schedule of being the worst class in the game and lending his expertise. First round hits are actually pretty rare. Your follow-up shot is critical. With modern optics, you rarely put crosshairs directly on the target. You use holds. My buddy, when we were in Iraq, finally got the sniper that was harassing our guard towers. He had an M14, spotted him, fired the shot and missed. The motherfricker stood up directly so that my buddy didn't have to adjust his sight pictures, as the sniper stood up in the exact spot that he had just missed. Bang. Snipers almost never see any action. They mostly just hurry around. Even in active war zones, the movies make it look like non-stop action, but they mostly just sit and wait and smoke and eat chow and wait more. Typical military, really. Hurry up and wait. My grandma's brother was special forces back home, and he said his favorite was sniper training. He mentioned that being sniper takes a certain kind of individual, and I know he's seen combat, but he's never told me much. My buddy was spec ops in the army, said he passed on sniper school because it seems too personal. His explanation was that in a firefight, you're spraying and praying at someone who's spraying and praying back at you. A sniper, though, you're looking at your target, you see their face, and you kill them. That's gotta weigh on you after a while. The movies don't show the tension, the thrill, or the light intakes of breath while watching your target and waiting to the exact right moment to press the trigger and buy that item on eBay with 1 second remaining. Long-range shooter and varmint hunter for way back in the day. The depiction of snipers yanking the trigger, their body movement, and the gun twisting and jumping is wholly not the kind of real movements for a perfected shot. The gun must move from its recoil, perhaps back and up a little bit, but any other movements are just baloney. and would cause a miss for a shot fired at any longer distance target. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below, and if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Retired SWAT sniper here, just a few off the top of my head. The spot with the best view is always on top of or very near an ant bed. If the ants have the day off, expect mosquitoes and biting flies. You're there for hours or days, hot or cold. Sometimes you have to get up and move quickly after laying up for a very long time, and you're sore as heck and legs are probably asleep. You might fall back down and look like an idiot. Movies and games ignore the bathroom issues. Your ghillie suit stinks and is full of burrs. Roaming dogs can give your spot away. Inevitably, your hide requires crawling a long way on your belly. Not hands and knees, but flat out pulling with fingers and toes. Dirt. Dirt is everywhere. It's hard to hide and keep your bullet free of foliage and obstruction all at the same time. You carry a lot of crap and you have to collect all of it when you move. Don't run out of anything like water or radio batteries because resupply will give you away. In some deserts, you'll encounter walking cacti. Those things suck. If you have allergies, you'll be crawling 400 yards through whatever's pollinating at the time. Oh, and what everyone else said about wind, temperature, humidity, vertical angles, and zero. It's really difficult to quickscope. Also, many people think that I have an aimbot, but I'm clearly just a god. When you shoot someone with a sniper, they fall forward, not backward most of the time. If they're standing still, they collapse like someone just teleported their backbone out of them. Really hard to envision unless you've seen it, but imagine going completely paralyzed instantly. You drop like a sack of bricks. If you're running, it looks like they just tripped and ate crap when they got hit. I'm not a sniper, by the way, but I work a coaxial weapon that has some decent range. I shot a long rifle once. The biggest lesson for me was that unlike in Hollywood, you shouldn't put your eye so close to the scope. Rather, it's always a few inches away. I'm so glad I wore glasses so that I had some kind of eye protection, otherwise I'd probably be blind in one eye. If someone says, "Sniper, no sniping," you have to cease sniping immediately. The following is from an American perspective on the war on terror. Everyone seems to focus on the modern sniper as this precision shot guy, and there is that aspect to them. But to me, working with them, it seemed like much more of their time and energy was spent on the reconnaissance role, especially with the proliferation of IEDs in this war. Basically, having a sniper team or squad set up an observation point on a ridge somewhere, watching over a particular stretch of road where IEDs have been common, or you have intel that one might be laid. Sniper team scouts that stretch of road from their operating position, and maybe they see the team go to place the IED. Then they call artillery in on that position, and you can apply this to other sections. Scouting an area where insurgents frequently set up ambushes, see if you can catch them while setting up. Providing overwatch for an infantry platoon as it patrols an opposing ridgeline or village. I've never heard of any other soldier say this, but one of our recon platoon's NCOs once mentioned a saying that a sniper's most powerful weapon is his radio. I don't know if that's actually a common saying within the scout sniper community or not, but in my observational experience, it really rung true. Fun fact, every one of those memory games and what's the difference between these two pictures is a gauge of how good a sniper you'll make. The best way to snipe is not to spend countless hours sitting still and silently waiting for the perfect shot. The best way to snipe is to jump off buildings doing a 360 motion while quickscoping offensively. You don't say. You know, the further through these answers we get, I suspect we're getting more and more silly ones. Apart from this one, 360 no-scopes are clearly based on real life. There's a lot of math. Can see why nobody puts that stuff into movies, though. Sort of relevant, I heard from one of my recruit trainers that if you hear a shot from long range, you shouldn't panic. The sniper's already missed. Because the bullet travels faster than sound, the first thing you hear is the impact of the round striking something, then the shot. My sniper section leader loved to say, "Snipers wear diapers." While I wasn't exactly busting out the Huggies, thank frick that I never needed to, just remember that everyone goes number 2. Enjoy those 2 weeks, small kill team, frickers. Also, those stupid stories about snipers seeing tears in the eyes of victims from 1,000 yards away right before they start landing headshots against whoever they're fighting is bullcrap. Your scope isn't that good. My grandfather was a sniper in Korea. He watched a guy for a week and learned his habits. He knew that guy was going to go down to the river to pray and planned to do it there. But on the day he began thinking of all the things he was going to take away from him and the people he'd be leaving behind, on that day he didn't pull the trigger. But then the next day he came down to the river to pray and didn't leave the riverbed alive. According to a family friend who's been a SEAL sniper since 2003, when you hit someone with a large caliber like a .50 or .338, you look for the spray of mist that comes up. Everyone is right about the math in the earlier comments. Ammunition is being selected and sometimes even hand-loaded. You take the spin of the earth into account, and then there's the waiting and waiting and waiting. It takes way more effort to cop all the hypebeast brands. You need to snipe the drops or they'll sell out in seconds. Not to mention the crazy bots people use. The world is against you. One thing I enjoyed about long weapon work is training as a spotter to see trace or the ripples in the air from the bullet path. It's pretty important for coaching your shooter and identifying where the bullet went. I don't recall seeing any accurate depiction of that in film, other than in The Matrix, and then only for dramatic effect. I'm by no means an expert on sniping. I trained in it for a time and I enjoyed it. Had a lot of respect for the repetition and discipline it took to get good. There's a lot of pride when you hit a small target at long range using a precise weapon. Film tends to underestimate the time investment and discipline required to get good at a skill like that. I worked with a guy who told me he had to wee in his own pants, or I think he said bronze his boots, on the job. So I'm not a sniper, but I am familiar with a lot of the military stuff. Here's my short list of things that are bullcrap. First, headshots. Snipers don't aim for the head unless they have to. Instead, they aim for the heart and lungs or center mass because it's a larger strike zone and it's still just as lethal, even if your shot is off by an inch or two. Also, laser sights. Absolutely no sniper in their right mind is going to use something that's going to give their position away or alert their target. This one's a no-brainer. Lone wolves don't exist. Real snipers almost always have a spotter or some other friendlies in the area. This actually applies to all military units. They never send just one man to do anything. Also, vantage points. Contrary to popular belief, the highest point on the map is not necessarily the best vantage point. While it offers the best visibility, it also means that they can see you too, and it's the first place they'll look when that shot is fired. Exposed muzzles. You'll never see a sniper's barrel sticking out of a window or over a ledge. They'll stand far enough back that their barrel isn't exposed. Again, this has to do with concealment versus advantage. And finally, the crack shot. There's no special trick or training when it comes to shooting, it's all fundamental basics and it takes a lot of practice, math, and some natural talent mixed in. Most guys in the community are not what you might expect. Extreme patience and intelligence are key aspects to the job, so the guys who are good at it are usually quiet thinking types with extreme levels of will and determination. Not to be confused as beta by any means, but not brute force types either. A lot of my old buddies are just physically fit nerds, really. I can't count the number of hours spent talking about World of Warcraft while waiting to infiltrate or during training hides. One thing film does get correct is how close the teammates are. It's definitely a family. The decision to ask my now-wife to marry me was made in a hide site with my spotter. Training is fun, but dope collection is pretty darn boring. Hours and hours through days and weeks and months, during all kinds of weather and lighting, just firing rounds at different distances to see the way the ammo and weapon performs for future reference, and meticulously recording the information. The math involved is not as difficult as it's made out to be and is often just repetitious. You don't have to be a perfect shooter, just perfectly consistent when inputting data, acquiring and holding sight picture, squeezing triggers and following through. Consistency equals accuracy, but a consistent shooter with textbook form is even more deadly. My source comes from 13 years and counting. My stepdad is a former sniper who spent several years deployed. I asked him for his answer, and he said the biggest thing they don't show correctly is the physical stress. In movies, the guy just shows up, sets up, takes the shot and leaves. He said they don't show how they have to sit there completely still for hours on end. An example he gave was one time having to wait 7.5 hours in one position and then getting told to stand down. My stepdad did never miss a shot in the field. He did get seen once though and have to bail out with his spotter very quickly. I loosely worked with one a few times. The guy was squared away. That's all I know, man. That's all I know. The guy was like cut clean and dry squared away. He loved his job, was professional and an infantryman, not a professional sniper. It was a duty, an assignment. Missions usually revolved in 3-day, 72-hour assignments. That's all I know, man. Squared away. I don't know about movies, but video games get quite a few things wrong. For example, whenever my team would hit a mark, it wasn't always necessarily the shooter's job to run out and teabag the corpse. A lot of times, the spotter would be the one to do it, since the shooter was oftentimes busy getting repositioned for the next mark. The amount of math and drawing that goes into it. I had a clipboard with a storage and had equations taped to the inside, colored pencils and paper for fire plan sketches, a top-down map of what you see, and terrain sketches, which is a literal drawing of what you see, Ziploc bags for waterproofing, tape, and 2 calculators. When did you get busted in the act? You know, aside from being caught doing the deed in the back of my car by a police officer, I don't really have one that's truly horrifying, but I know the rest of the internet does, so let's hear it. When I was 6, I had to go to the bathroom pretty bad, and my father used to tinkle in the backyard all the time, so I ran out into the back as quickly as possible, and for some reason, don't ask why, I completely removed my clothing and proceeded to go wee-wees on our oak tree. And out of nowhere, I also went number 2 on myself while standing up. My parents and 3 of their friends, who had been enjoying their drinks, saw the whole thing. The problem for me wasn't that I got busted, it's that I got busted by the wrong person. In freshman year in college, I was in the dorms and I had a pretty goofy relationship with my roommate at the time. I heard his key enter the door, so I decided to do something funny. So I stood up in the center of our room and shoved my hand into my pants and began to furiously mime tickling my pickle. I closed my eyes, headbanged, and waved my other hand wildly in the air. I heard the door swing open and I just went for it, shaking my head and both my arms in an exaggerated fashion. When I opened my eyes to see his expression, I realized I was staring into the eyes of my roommate's father, whom I hadn't met yet. He was helping my roommate carry some groceries in from the car. He set down the groceries as quickly as he could and then just left. There was another trip, but he just left those at the door and didn't come inside. He'd flushed red instantly. In short, my freshman college roommate's dad walked in on my imitation of whacking the mule wildly in the center of the room. It was the first time we'd met. At the Mall of America, walking around the upper balcony when the floor started shaking a bit, I muttered out loud, "Holy crap, was that an earthquake?" I turned around and there was a morbidly obese woman walking right past me. Oh my god, I hope she didn't hear me. It still might have been an earthquake and a coincidence. Still, I can't imagine that either of you are feeling great for the next few hours of your lives. I too have done this kind of crap and you have my utmost sympathy. Post-whoopee with an undressed boyfriend laying in my dorm bed, I heard a knock at the door. For whatever reason, I assume it's my roommate, who was pretty chill about stuff like that, so I wrap myself in a towel and stand behind my dresser, about to head into the bathroom, and say, "Come in." It was both of my RAs coming in to do room inspection. It wasn't my proudest moment. I can't imagine what they thought about me and why I thought it was okay to say, "Come in," right then. I was at the Metrodome for a Twins game. I developed a severe case of itchy butt, and it soon became clear that a booster wipe was imperative. Left the game and stood in the long line for the stalls. When it was finally my turn, the large handicapped stall with the double-wide door was the one available. When I got in, I had some difficulty with the broken locking mechanism, but soon I got it to seemingly latch. I then went to town on my itchy butt. Facing the toilet so it would seem like I was taking a leak, I wiped once and again and a third time until it came back white. I threw the final tissue in the toilet, pulled up my pants, zipped and flushed, finally turning around to leave the stall, only to see 20 or more very uncomfortable-looking men doing their best to avoid any eye contact with me. The stall door had silently swung open behind me, and my shame was laid bare for all the world to see. I wanted to make a beeline from the bathroom, but in light of what I'd just been doing, and the fact that everyone knew it, that just wasn't an option. So, head down, I darted to the sink, washed my hands, and got the heck out of there as quickly as possible. I've never been so simultaneously embarrassed and amused at the same time. Despite my mortification, it was just too funny for me not to share. I bring down the house every time I tell this story. Walking home after a closing shift at Wendy's, my bowels suddenly went into watery-feeling red alert mode. Still 3 blocks away from home, 4 blocks away from any public restrooms, I glanced around frantically and spotted a house across the street with tall boxwood bushes surrounding it. Streetlights didn't reach it. Target acquired. I sprinted over, yanked down my pants, and squatted behind the nearest bush. Then with a hearty, "Hi-yo, I blasted my employee meal all over the wall, ground, bush, pants and undies, and shoes. With a heartfelt, "Frick," I gingerly tried to scramble out of my soiled clothing, only to trip helplessly into the crap-soaked bush as my understandably unremoved and equally crap-covered shoes snagged in my pants legs. I laid in the now crushed bush, cursing quietly for a moment as I didn't want to disturb the residents. Then I managed to kick off my shoes and remove the pants and undies without getting much further soiled. The undies were ruined, but the pants, with a little work, could pass for okay in the dark until I got home. Crouching behind that bush, bitterly enjoying the cool breeze on my butt and junk, I scrubbed the soiled parts of the pants and the grass, used my t-shirt to clean myself. I always took off the employee shirt after work, thank God. I did all of this as best as I could, shoved the undies and t-shirt as far into the bush as I could hide them, then stood up to inspect myself, ready to make a quick dash for home. The sound of 3 startled screeches rang out into the neighborhood as I suddenly popped up facing the house, directly in front of what I guess was the bedroom window, where both the husband and wife, in bedclothes, were staring in disbelief not 6 inches from my nose. I convulsively jerked back, again falling into the fricking bush, sliding off it to the other side on my back, scratching the living heck out of myself. Boxwoods are tough, by the way. I flopped like a fish in agony for a few moments, or what seemed like an eternity, then finally managed to stagger back to my feet and bound groggily away. Shoes forgotten, one arm clawing at my back, trying to feel if I'd actually impaled myself on that bush or not. It wasn't my proudest moment. In short, forced to take a horrific number 2 under a bedroom window, thoroughly humiliated by a bush, observed for an unknown amount of time by the occupants of said house. When I first started working in New York City, I lived on Long Island and had a nearly 2-hour door-to-door commute via the Long Island Railroad. One night on a later train, I managed to grab a great seat only to have them pull the train out of service and ask that we switch to a new train. For those that don't know, this is bullcrap because now all the people that were late and forced to stand have the advantage of exiting first and getting to the new train for a seat. I got off and I knew that I had no shot at a seat as I was behind hundreds of people going up the escalator. I noticed that the down escalator was totally empty and decided to just go for it. Ran my butt off to get to the top, took my final leap and came up short. I hit the deck flat on my face. Humiliated, I got back up and ran to the train. I got myself a seat too. In short, don't go up the down escalator unless you're willing to pay the price. This is a wonderful depiction of how most of us would do in any given action movie. So thank you once again, people of the internet, for reminding us that we're not Jason Bourne. We're Terry, the overweight office accountant, and if we try to climb down via that scaffolding, we will in fact shatter our pelvis. Sophomore year of college, I was on the rowing team. The weather wasn't yet warm enough to be on the water, so we were inside on the ergs, which is what we call the rowing machines. We had some hard workout, I can't quite remember what, but it was an interval workout with 3 minutes on and 2 minutes off for 25 minutes or something along those lines. The point is that it was intense, more intense than normal. The intenseness of the workout was making me have to break wind, but the constant use of my leg, butt, and abdominal muscles prevented me from letting them out. So after 25 minutes, we had a 5-minute break before the next 25-minute piece, and I go over to the water fountain to drink. I had my music blasting and I was exhausted, so I didn't really notice my surroundings at all. I just took a quick glance around before bending down to drink. While I was drinking, all of the gas that had built up came to a head and was about ready to burst. Still bent over and drinking, I let it rip. I swear it was the loudest, largest volume emission I've ever expelled in my entire life, and I still have yet to top it. The force of my butt cheeks vibrating was violent enough to the point that it made my butt sore afterwards. It was a full second. Seriously, say 1001. And that's how long it went. Of absolute maximum flatulent thrust. It felt like I'd expelled my entire lung capacity out of my rear end. Feeling rather pleased with myself, I stood up and turned to go back to the ergs. To my horror, standing directly behind me, seriously not more than a foot from my butt, was a girl waiting to drink. She didn't look up, she didn't move in any way, her facial expression was completely frozen with her mouth wide open, eyes staring at where my butt had been. I quickly shuffled away and looked behind me after walking about 50 feet, and she still hadn't moved. I spent the rest of the next week bursting into random fits of giggles. It became a bit of a team joke. To this day, I'll sometimes think about it and burst out laughing. I also giggle at the fact that she may have seen who I was before standing behind me, and every time she sees me on campus, all she can think about is that one scarring moment of her life. In short, ripped an enormous guff when I was drinking at the water fountain, not knowing anyone was behind me. The girl froze in a look of terror. Maybe she's still standing there paralyzed to this day. I went to college about 4 hours from home. I was coming home from spring break one year. The parents lived in a rural area, and about the last 45 minutes of the trip, there was no place to stop and take a bio break. I didn't have to go at the last opportunity, so I drove right on by. I was about 20 minutes from home, and I felt the turd drop into the chamber. This wasn't a "ruh-roh, Raggy" moment right away. I felt I could hold it together. It would only be about 20 more minutes. All was well, and as I approached home, I think the psychological fact of, "Ah, yes, I made it," set in, and the last mile of my trip was sheer panic. But alas, this is not a tale of me crapping my pants. This is a tale of not expecting anyone to be home. I made it to the front door, and as I was clinching the Bombay doors tightly, I started singing a little tune to take my mind off the torpedo that was armed and ready to launch. Gonna crap my pants, gonna crap my pants, gonna crap in my pants. Over and over again. Walked into the kitchen and saw one of my mum's best friends who was there for a visit, unbeknownst to me. Mum was at work. Horrified, I immediately changed my tune and played it off like I was just lazily singing random tunes. Shush 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 do-dum-dum-do-do. So I poker-faced it and went right for the John. But I think she probably figured it out. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. In second grade, I was asked to deliver something to the main office. I was so excited that I got chosen that I forgot the door to the classroom was right at the end of the hall I was about to go down. The whole class watched me skip all the way down the hall. The sound of laughter was echoing down the hall, and the crippling embarrassment still haunts me nearly 20 years later. Listening to music in my car, awesome song comes on. For a second, I think I'm a rock star and bob my head up and down with that "I'm so hardcore" face. I do that all the time, I can't help it. I'm at a light and I look over, and my ex is next to me with his new girlfriend. They both start laughing and waving, and while they were still watching, I accidentally spit my own gum down my shirt. I cannot look him in the face when I run into him. I live in a small town and I see him all the time. I was about 13 and watching a Marilyn Monroe movie. She was doing this hot striptease, so I thought, why not? And started whacking the old hog. Now, I thought I was alone in an upstairs bedroom, so I finished and then noticed there was a guy in the window smiling at me. I forgot they were painting the house. Later, my sister said to me, "So, you really like Marilyn Monroe, huh?" Oh God, I think it's pretty crazy that this guy, A, stayed watching a minor do his stuff until the end of the deed, and that B, he immediately decided he should share the fact that he was staring at self-fulfilling members of the household. Not sure that anything he'd have to say would hold up in court. My lord, I'd managed to forget this for 19 years, and now here we are. I was about 6, and my family had just gotten a cat. He licked himself all over, all the time, because that's just what cats do. Not understanding the purpose, I figured there had to be something awesome about licking a cat. So I was just sitting there, looking at the cat, who was just licking the frick away as usual. My sister was across the room but otherwise occupied. Curiosity getting the better of me, I lean over and lick my cat. For the record, he tasted like a cat. So as I sat contemplating the cattiness, I hear from across the room, "Did you just lick the cat?" Yes. Sister was disappointed. I used to sketch customers at work when they were taking forever to order and just staring at the menu. Often I'd accentuate undesirable features because I freaking hate most of our customers. I stopped doing this when a lady came up to the counter and leaned over it asking, "What are you drawing?" It got awkward. No one noticed before her though. I used to work at Starbucks. We had this massive pair of tongs used for pulling paninis out of the oven. One closing shift, I had the brilliant idea of mimicking Pac-Man. I then proceeded to clap said tongs in front of my face while chanting "Waka Waka Waka" and walking out onto what I thought was a completely empty sales floor. I was greeted by all the members of my new boyfriend's family. I froze, and they were staring blankly at me. Awesome first impression. Oh god, here it goes. Two-part story. Starts with a whole day trip with my dad and a couple of his friends. After eating a couple of burgers my dad made, I got a massive case of the runs. I went into the woods to hide in a couple of trees. No biggie, I thought, after evacuating an ungodly amount of number 2. Later that day on the ride home, it happened again. Holy butt juice. My insides were churning, I'm trying to concentrate, it's 15 minutes more home. We finally make it, and as I take that final leap out of the car, I accidentally brown myself in front of all of my dad's friends. They, being the outstanding gentlemen they were, decided to go and get a couple of beers while I sort my crap-covered self out. So here I am, taking a shower to clean myself after the horrible incident, and I start to sing in the shower. I'm singing the Rocky theme at full power, tarun tun tarun tun. Finish my shower and say, frick it, no one's home. So I walk out undressed while doing the Rocky theme and air punching like there's no tomorrow. Walk across the living room where I feel a presence. It's my dad and all his friends staring at me, what the frick faces all around. Not my proudest moment. In short, I crapped myself then got caught air punching to the Rocky theme undressed. When I was an imaginative 13-year-old, I was always coming up with inventive ways to prepare for kissing a girl. I tried kissing magazine pictures, which didn't taste nice, and the mirror, which tasted even worse. Also a balloon. Seriously, don't bother. But I still felt woefully unprepared. One day, I was at a department store and I saw a shapely half mannequin that was sequestered away from the general public. I thought I'd give it a shot. Had to be better than a balloon, right? Not so much. I guess mannequins aren't cleaned regularly because when I pecked it on the lips, the funky smell and oily film hit me like a brick. That brought me to my senses and I turned to leave. I had to find a water source to clean whatever filth I'd just touched my mouth to. That's when I heard the bzzzt bzzzt sound of servo motors and I looked up at the security camera zooming in on me. My grandmother used to run estate sales for people who didn't know what to price things at, or for people who were still grieving and couldn't be bothered. I always came to help her out at estate sales because it was fun to just hang around with random people's old stuff. So one time when I was about 17, I'd kind of had some green herb, and I was hanging out in some dead dude's house when I found a milk pump for new mothers. I'm a guy, by the way. And I thought, what the heck? And I started to pump my chest for man milk. Not 10 seconds later, shirt over the back of my neck and hooked up to this pump, my grandmother walks in, manages to maintain the very blank expression on her face, does a 180-degree turn, walks out and closes the door after her. Not unlike Grandpa Simpson in the Burlesque House episode. And not a word of it was ever spoken again. In college, I lived with 2 roommates in second year. One weekend, they both went away back to their hometowns, so I thought it was the perfect opportunity to have my then-girlfriend over for some fun bedroom times without volume restraint. Saturday morning, we got at it again right after getting up, and after I excused myself, walking completely undressed to go get us some water. I walked out of my room and to the end of the bedroom hallway, and when I opened the door, one of my roommates was just standing there, about to light a cigarette. Inside, which was strictly verboten amongst us. We both just froze. We were staring at each other, me completely undressed and him with a cigarette hanging from his mouth, a lit match burning in his hand right next to the cigarette. I wheeled around after what seemed like forever and walked back into the bedroom where I fell over laughing. As someone who's been caught in this position and worse by flatmates, it seems like one of those things just neither of you ever mention again. And for whatever he could complain about, at least you weren't the one breaking the rules like he was. More something said, I was walking down the hallway at my school. I proceeded to walk up the stairs with my arms full of books. For some reason, I thought my body could handle the simple task of stairs, considering I'd been on them my entire life. I was wrong, of course, and my left foot caught on the staircase. I collapsed to the ground, face planting into a stair. My books exploded and scattered everywhere. I just looked up and screamed, "Gone!" Then I saw an elderly professor staring down at me. He made a remark about noise in the hallway and smirked. The wrinkly old jerk didn't even help me. I was in the park a few weeks ago and I noticed a mini tornado/whirlwind nearby that was about 10 feet wide, whipping garbage and leaves around in a perfect circle. As it moved closer, I held my ground and soon I was in the exact eye of the storm with flying debris circling around me. Accordingly, I clenched my fists and raised them to around chest level, then looked to the sky with eyes squinting through the dust and wind and let out a mighty extended "Roar!" to fully emphasize my powerful wizarding weather summoning skills. It was exhilarating. At least 5 people probably saw me, but I was unconcerned as they were mere mortals. I walked away like a boss as if it was nothing more than a morning stretch. A few years ago, I was walking through Walmart with my dad. We were just going to get something real quick. I was wearing a low-cut shirt, which is relevant. My dad and I were talking about funny walks people do, and I started in on this long stride, fast-paced walk. Well, my chest popped out of my shirt. I got them back inside real quick and looked around. At first, I didn't see anyone notice and then looked ahead and there was this guy walking towards us. I'm absolutely sure he saw, although he sported a pretty good poker face. When I was a teenager and my parents were away for the weekend, I decided that it would of course be the opportunity for an extravaganza of beating my meat like the world's worst butcher. I got hold of some adult magazines, set myself up nicely in the living room with the normal accoutrement, and after having a first great whack of things, I was ready for another go. Cue my furious and almost violent tugging, legs akimbo, some really uninhibited crap. And then, looking slightly to the right of the TV, I see movement in the door. After quickly putting myself away and muting the various moans coming from the TV, I sprang to my feet and cautiously made my way to the door, just in time to glimpse the fleeing backs of what appeared to be young children exiting our driveway. I believe they may have been selling chocolates or some other school fundraising effort. Since then, I've been sure to keep my activities within reasonable limits and out of public view. My office has really tinted windows, and one time I opened the blinds and saw a big, fat lady pressed up against the glass, picking food out of her teeth in the window's reflection. It was really gross, and she never saw me. I just closed the blinds again. Wedding attendees. Did you ever see one get cancelled mid-ceremony? In 6th grade, my entire class went to our teacher's wedding. My teacher was the bride and about 3/4 of the way down the aisle when the groom decided he just couldn't do it. He walked off to the side and at first my teacher and her father didn't notice and kept walking, smiling radiantly. There was about a minute of really solid confusion, last-minute cold feet, bathroom emergency, before everyone realized what was going on. My teacher was whisked out of the church and an announcement was made that there wasn't going to be a wedding. This happened the 2nd or 3rd week of June. She didn't come back for the last week of school. Ugly situation. Not called off, just relocated. The bride wanted everything to be lit by candlelight as it was much more romantic. Well, of course, something, a wall hanging or tapestry of some sort, caught fire, set off the fire alarm, and everyone had to evacuate the church. The ceremony was continued and finished in the parking lot with a couple of fire trucks in the background. I worked at a bar when I was at university. 2 guys came in dressed to the nines. I asked what they were doing that day and they told me the wedding they were going to was cancelled. The maid of honor had been sleeping with the groom. One of the other bridesmaids had known about it for some time but decided the best time to tell her was the morning of the wedding. A co-worker of the groom got super drunk, stood up and announced she had been boinking the groom for the past 6 months. This was right before the bride walked down the aisle. The bride's cousin had a sudden and unexpected fatal heart attack. Took the entire family a month to recover. Bride and groom had a small ceremony afterwards. God, what a drama queen. Just had to take the spotlight away from their happy day, didn't they? Some people. And yes, the narrator is almost certainly going to hell for that one, among many other reasons. Not a wedding I was attending, but my friend had told me about it. The ceremony was never called off, but in fact the bride and groom had decided not to get married but just didn't tell their guests that. So my friend was telling me how this couple were having problems before the wedding. He would say going to their house was just awkward and that they'd always complain about each other to him. On the day of the wedding, everything from the outside looked normal. Bride and groom seemed like they were genuinely happy, but they'd decided to not actually get married. Like they never went and got a marriage certificate, so it was basically a fake wedding. They had a ceremony where they exchanged I do's, but it wasn't actually real. Guests bought gifts and everything for the couple, and they just cashed in and went their separate ways afterwards. My friend said he found out months after the wedding that the whole thing was just a hoax, and how they weren't giving any of the gifts back. I know it wasn't really called off mid-ceremony so much as the bride and groom secretly deciding to call it off, but I thought the story was wild enough to share. My father's first wedding. This took place in Colombia in the mid-1960s. He and his best friend were marrying sisters. They also happened to be my father's first cousins, which is an important factor. Anywho, this wedding became an impromptu family reunion since it was basically the same family on both sides. One of my father's relatives was a young man in the Colombian military at the time, and he was trying to entertain the family's children the morning of the wedding, while everyone was getting dressed and preparing. His chosen entertainment appeared to be playing around with deactivated hand grenades, apparently trying to drive a nail through them to mount them onto a board of wood. I don't know, that's just the story consensus. Turns out it wasn't properly deactivated and was a perfectly functioning grenade, and it performed its purpose admirably, instantly killing the young man and a lot of the family's collected youngest generation instantly. The wedding wasn't cancelled though, they just had a small quiet ceremony a few days later. Jesus. When I was in the Navy, scams for BAH, or Basic Allowance for Housing, were pretty rampant. I'm sure they still are to a certain extent. Basically, the base pay you receive in the military isn't that much. If you're married or you have kids, however, you get BAH, which is a tax-free chunk of change the government gives you every month so you can house your dependents. How much you receive is based off the zip code where your dependents physically reside. So if I'm stationed in Norfolk, but my wife and kids are living in Boulder, Colorado, then we get the BAH for Boulder, Colorado, and I live on the ship or in the barracks. It's fairly common, and the sailors who do this are referred to as geographical bachelors. Okay, so with all the setup out of the way, I was shipmates with a guy who was a complete sleaze. He was also bilking the Navy out of BAH for many years. He was turned in multiple times, but he kept getting away with it because, at the end of the day, it's very difficult to prove that you're only married for the BAH. Nobody says that it has to be a healthy marriage. Nobody says it has to be a marriage based on love. He had been married to an older woman, like in her 80s, living in San Francisco for the past few years. San Francisco has some of the highest BAH rates, so he split it down the middle with her and they each took home a decent chunk of change. In exchange, she played along, let him list her home as his home, and for all legal matters, considered him her husband. Well, she died and he was bummed and a little angry that he was about to lose a big chunk of cash. So he went out and began seeking his next paper bride in a high BAH zip code. He settled on a working girl from New York City who was from some Eastern European country. To legitimize all of this, he had a wedding and invited numerous people from work to witness it. I went there because there was a promise of free food and he told us we didn't have to get him gifts. Easy day. About 5 minutes into the whole thing, she backs out. Apparently, she didn't fully understand what he was proposing. I think it was mainly a language barrier issue. She thought he just wanted someone to pretend to be his wife, like hang on his arm at a party and say she was Mrs. Crapbag. She didn't realize that he actually intended to legally marry her. Quite a bit of this was hashed out in front of all of us because they retreated to a private area where, as I understand it, he pleaded with her to go through with it and promised to remit her about $1,000 every month as long as she played ball. After an hour of begging and pleading, she left. We ate the food, had a good laugh, and went about our lives. The guy also found himself a proper paper wife and began bilking BAH again before getting booted from the Navy for something completely unrelated. I was told the bride never showed up because someone was having cold feet. The worst part was I was a young kid at the time and couldn't understand why someone would break off their engagement to a person they loved just because their feet were cold. It took me years to realize it was a saying. Why doesn't she just put some socks on and get on with it? My mum's friend was dating a man with a drinking problem. When he asked her to marry him, she said she would marry him if he never had another drink again. He agreed to give up the sauce for her. The night before the wedding, his friends threw him a bachelor party with alcohol and he drank. When he walked down the aisle, he was staggering a bit and she noticed. "Do you take this man to be your lawful wedded husband?" "No, I don't." They paused the wedding and went back with the priest for a counseling session. The priest came out and sent all the guests home. You know what? Good on her for sticking to her word. If you give them an inch, they'll take a mile. Went to a cousin's wedding somewhere in Arkansas, maybe Little Rock. The wedding was put on pause when the priest started coughing uncontrollably, turned red, and fell into the altar. He lived, but there was a mild panic at the wedding when it was discovered that he had had viral meningitis, and literally the entire church full of people, let's call it 300 to be fair, had to go to the hospital and get tested and prophylactic treatments. Sounds like that wedding was the event of the century. The viral event. Actually, there's probably multiple stories like this during the pandemic alone. My cousin was getting married, and about 15 to 30 minutes before the wedding started, she was told that the man she was going to marry was arrested and had been on Washington's Most Wanted because of stuff he did either with a 14-year-old or was planning to do with a 14-year-old. He was like in his mid-20s, he ended up in prison for whatever it was, and right after she told everyone, the back porch broke right under her and her friends. It wasn't much of a drop, like 6 inches, but that's when she burst out in full-blown tears. It was a very awkward day, and honestly, if I wasn't there to witness it, I wouldn't believe it either. My wedding was close to being called off since my husband's grandfather was close to dying. Everyone told us to go through with the wedding anyway, so we did. My husband's grandfather ended up dying close to the moment we said, "I do," and my father-in-law got the call from the hospital shortly after we left the church. They told all of his family, but not us about it. So we had a lame wedding with everyone grieving but saying, "It's nothing," when we asked why no one was dancing. We got condolences the morning after and congratulations on his funeral. I could still cry when I think about all that stuff. It was 4 months ago. I should start off by saying I'm black, meaning a wedding will never start on time, and showing up on time, you're probably early. After 30 to 45 minutes of waiting, the old ladies from her church and my aunties started talking. Found out this was the second time they've tried to get married. The first time they tried to get married, he got into a bar fight the night before. We continued waiting for about 1.5 hours total, and finally they told everyone to go to the reception space because they're about to lose the church. I don't think anything of it. Whatever, there's food, let's go. During the reception, she does it all. The first dance, with my uncle, the dance with her dad, all the traditional wedding reception things. If it's not clear, this is all without her actual husband. Well, no one knows what to do at this point. They can't really give speeches because the groom isn't there, and it just seems awkward to celebrate something that, for the second time, didn't happen. Well, the bride decided to do a toast all on her own. She gets on the mic and tells everyone about how maybe she's just not meant to be married, how she's tried to get married to this guy, and it just isn't happening. Then she goes, "You know where this N-word is? Do y'all know where? Where this mother fricker is? He's in frickin' jail because of his dumb groomsman letting him drive home from the fricking bachelor party, and he got a DUI. So yeah, he's in fricking jail and we've been trying to get him out. There was no third time and no Prince Charming for her." You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Not called off, just interrupted. I was watching my friend's wife getting married. All was going well. Just as they were doing their photos, after being declared husband and wife, I leant against the wall to try and get a good photo, and I leaned on the light switches for the entire hall. All the lights went out, everyone was looking around, and thankfully no one else knew it was me, so in the confusion I tried to switch them back on. And they didn't come back on. Now their wedding photo album has some nicely lit photos and some that are slightly more edgy and dark. I've been filming weddings part-time for 7 years and I've only seen something like this 3 times. None of these were straight up called off though. One of the groomsmen accidentally dropped the wedding ring and it rolled down the elevator shaft. Ceremony was postponed for a little over an hour. Funny thing is, maintenance found the ring, and apparently the groomsmen made up some bogus story to feed the bride. She had no idea what really happened. There was another one where the bridesmaid passed out due to heat stroke, and a third where a guest accidentally stepped on the couple's little dog, broke its spine, and had to be sent to the vet. The dog was like family, so the couple was MIA for almost 4 hours dealing with it. Must have been a real small dog. And that person must have been running or something. Me and my guys were asking ourselves, how the hell do you accidentally step on a dog? The wedding I was at still went ahead. The bride and groom were standing at the altar with the wooden rail in front. One of the groomsmen starts swaying, and over he goes, face planting, hitting the rail on the way down. He ended up with a broken nose, and an ambulance was called, and he was taken to hospital. The wedding still went on, and everyone made the best of it, and we were happy for the bride and groom. Cut to the reception following, a little boy was running around like a mad thing, as kids do, and ran through a glass door. The ambulance was called, the child was taken to the hospital. He was okay. The marriage didn't last, though. You'd think after such a roller coaster of a wedding that their marriage would pretty much survive anything. Warts in the downstairs area. I'm not even joking. I was one of the groomsmen for my friend's wedding, and his family was super religious. I mean like Jonestown levels of religious. So he hadn't been intimate with his bride yet. So we were all waiting by the altar for the music to start, and we were silently chatting. Now, one of the other groomsmen, he had dated her for about a year before they, the current groom and bride-to-be, got together. And he let loose the following statement to another groomsman. Yeah, she's really sweet and all, but she gave me something fierce. And both the one he told that to and I asked him to elaborate a bit. And I'm sure she ended up giving him warts down there. We had maybe a good 3 minutes before the music started, and we all started telling the groom as fast as we could because he had a right to know if she hadn't told him. He had this look to him like he didn't want to believe it, but he slowly walked down the center aisle to go ask his bride if all of this was true. Now, when he gets up, his parents follow him because they think he's getting cold feet. The rest I can only describe from my place at the front of the church. For the next 45 minutes, we heard talking, then shouting, then crying on repeat. Then the dad came out and told everyone that the ceremony was going to be postponed. It was a small ceremony, so we were all just scratching our heads and we left. We all then got a call 2 hours or so later that the wedding was off indefinitely. Apparently, the groom's parents didn't want him marrying someone who wasn't a virgin, let alone with a transmissible disease. We gave him some space for a few days, and after a while he filled us in on some of the details. Most of that wasn't important, but the part that really punched me in the feelings was when he told us about how the bride had to tell him and his parents in her damn wedding gown that she got the thing from something that took place against her will. The groom didn't call off the wedding, the parents did. I still think they're absolutely warty pricks to this day. To my knowledge though, the former couple still talks to each other, so there's that. My good lord. Well, to further add to the narrator is going to hell pile of evidence, fundamentalist religious people just kinda suck. If the guy was gonna marry her anyway, literally warts and all, standing in the way is just crappy and evil. Get bent, family of the groom. We had just finished the ceremony and everyone was heading into the building to start dinner. I found my seat near the bride and started to chat with her friends. I saw the bride sit down at the table next to me and say, I think I'm going to have a seizure. And she did. Fortunately, myself and a few other people had medical training and she turned out perfectly fine. After the EMS left, she stayed and finished the night by dancing and having fun. She actually had a history of seizures and had neglected to tell anyone or take her medicine this week. My best friend's wedding got called off. I was the master of ceremonies. His brother was his best man, so I was in a very unique way able to experience this beautiful event. I arrived about 2 hours before the ceremony was to start to chat to the caterer and check the microphone and speakers. As I was chatting to the DJ and just generally checking things out, I noticed every once in a while a waiter would walk by the bar with a tray of wine, beer, and shooters. I didn't think anything of it though. As time got closer to the ceremony at the church, people had arrived and everyone was having snacks and drinks outside the reception venue. Both the church and reception were on a vineyard, so they were right next to each other. The bride was delayed for a long time, something I couldn't understand since she was getting ready in the guest house right there on the property. In any event, we finally got the go-ahead that the bride was on the way to the church. They conveyed her on a golf cart, so we started getting everyone seated and ready for the show. I was standing at the entrance of the church to close the door after the bride entered, so I got to see everything transpire in all its glory. The bride climbed off the cart, and as she was walking towards the stairs with her father, she tripped and face-planted right there on the steps of the church. As this is in an agricultural setting, you can imagine that there's a lot of dirt everywhere, and accordingly, her dress was filthy. At this stage, I simply thought she fell over by accident and I ran over to help her get up. She dusted herself off, said she was fine, and continued in her usual fashion to enter the church. It's then that my suspicions started peaking. I noticed she was wobbling from side to side as she walked, but thought maybe she got hurt in the fall. As she started walking down the aisle, however, she was stopping to greet people in the aisles, making jokes, pulling faces, giving people thumbs up. It immediately hit me. She was hammered. By the time she got to the groom, he just stood there with his jaw open. He could immediately tell what was happening. She was standing there next to him in the church right in front of everyone, swaying from side to side and slurring. It was painful and cringe-inducing to witness. The best part is, she insisted the wedding proceed and that everything was hunky-dory. The more the groom wanted to suspend proceedings for a bit, she insisted they proceed. Then she exploded at him in the church in front of everyone, shouting and accusing him of ruining her wedding day, and then she stormed out of the church crying, and wouldn't you know it, she bumped into a bench in the aisle and went flying to the ground again. Wedding dresses are not made for running, and they're especially not made for drunken running. People helped her up and escorted her outside. The groom also left, and everyone just kind of sat there in silence. Since it was rather hot that day, we told everyone to go to the reception hall and have a drink, while the situation was being dealt with. The bride had been drinking the entire day, and those shooters and drinks I saw being carried from the bar were for her and her friends in the guest house. I inquired at the bar how much the bill was prior to people arriving, and was shocked to see that between her and 2 of her friends, they'd drunk 3 bottles of wine, 6 beers, 6 ciders, and a crap load of shooters ranging from tequila to Jägermeister. In any event, the bridezilla is now crying and throwing tantrums at the guest house, loud enough for everyone to hear at the reception. Apparently, she continued to drink some of the leftovers from the previous round of drinks. The groom came out to apologize to everyone and to say that the wedding wouldn't be going ahead, but that everyone must please eat and drink and have some fun since everything had already been paid and catered for. I made the announcement and I joined the groom and his family, who had flown in specially for the wedding, for a drink and to come to grips with what just happened. Many people, especially from the bride's side, just went home. Meanwhile, bridezilla was crying and drinking away in the guest house with her bridesmaids. After about an hour or so, with many people having left, she stormed out of the guest house and screamed at the groom for ruining her wedding again, except this time she's even drunker. She storms off with her friends, and eventually we see them climb in a car and off they go. We finished our food and had some drinks and called it a night. I drive home with the groom and his folks, only to discover when we got to the complex where he and bridezilla were staying that she was sitting outside at the bar, right next to the complex, still in her wedding dress, with makeup smeared everywhere and drinking beers with her friends. The groom phoned her father, who then promptly came to pick her up and take her home. And that's the last I ever saw of bridezilla. They tried to make it work by going to counseling, and things just kind of fizzled out. Mainly because she was always drunk. They'd lived together for 2 years or so prior to the wedding, and while she did drink a lot, I never noticed it was that bad. Meanwhile, my friend informed me it had actually been a bit of a problem, but he didn't think it would get that bad. Well, it did. The wedding photographer and videographer was a friend of ours and was recording pretty much everything, so there's still a copy of this out somewhere. It reminds me I should probably email him and request a copy. In short, bride was absolutely crap-faced, fell at the church, fought with the groom at the altar, and then stormed off crying and screaming, and then continued drinking. Gentlemen, what made you nope out before the second date? We went to her place, and her pets and plants were all dead. I saw goldfish floating upside down in a fish tank, and she had a dead hamster in a cage on her dining room table. She said, "Yeah, that happens a lot." And all I'm imagining is hamster after hamster starving to death right in front of her. The word sociopath floated into my mind. I made some excuses to leave, and she went a bit nuts at that point, which concerned me quite a bit, but at least I'd already figured her head was seriously spun. She rolled her eyes when I said she looked nice, she'd clearly put in a lot of effort, criticized where I chose to eat, complained about the music we went to see, I spent the whole date anxious, assuming that she was hating every moment, because, she didn't have anything positive to say about anything. And then she said, "I had a good time, let's do this again." Nah, I'm good. I've got enough negativity and mixed signals coming from my own brain. I don't need it coming from the outside too. Oh god, she's a complainer, just like my mom. She always manages to find something to complain about even when the situation gets better. I try not to be like her on dates. It seems that when people are constantly complaining, they literally have nothing to contribute. I went on a date with a lady I met online. She talked about 3 things on this date and little else: her pets, her ex, and the last time she had gastroenteritis. There was no second date. Went to dinner, she was on her phone the entire time texting, even when we were talking. Figured she was just in it for the free dinner, cause really, what's the point of agreeing to a date if you're not going to try to get to know the person? That's when you put down cash for your half of the bill and walk out. Frick that. What that person has just suggested is a real power move. I'm not sure that I could ever work up the nerve to do it myself, but honestly, people who behave like that date probably deserve it. What complaints can they make? Having to pay for their own share? There's maybe some nuance to it. If your date seems nice but you're just not interested or feeling the connection, then maybe pay for the bill. If they're behaving like an absolute jerk, pay your part and bail. So, I'm not proud of this one, but I'll share. Years ago, when I was still single, I met someone online. We chatted for a bit and she seemed cool enough, and we decided to meet up for a burger at a place I knew downtown. Seemed like a kind of low-key thing. I got into the bar a few minutes early and ordered a beer, then finished it. Then, 45 minutes late, she rolls in. First, okay, cool, we have jobs and we deal with traffic or whatever, but no excuse, just a shrug and, "That's how it goes sometimes." She sat down and we began chit-chatting. She asked about my work. I assumed it was a regular nervous bit of small talk. 2, but no, it was trying to feel out how much money I made. And 3, when she asked my job title and I told her, she immediately suggested that we leave this casual pub place to hit up a wine bar down the block. Okay, I guess. It's a little more upscale than I had in mind, but okay. We walk there, get seated, and then come the menus. 4, she ordered herself dinner. Some kind of seafood thing that cost an insane amount of money. And a bottle of wine. Not a glass, mind you. A $250 fricking bottle of wine. I'd already ordered a drink from the bar for myself, and I got the impression that this was not wine to share. She kept talking about how much her job sucked and how little it paid, and how no one at her work was fun to hang out with. Like the only conversation she had was bashing work and co-workers, with a few mildly racist undertones. 6. The whole time she was texting friends to meet up that evening. I was invited, of course, to party with them all night, and I assume to bankroll their fun. I discreetly went up to the bar, paid for my drink, and just left. I straight up noped out of there without so much as a goodbye. From my messages when I checked in online later, I know that I stuck her with an almost $500 bill and that she was going to sue me for it. Heard from the wine bar owner later, it was close to work and sometimes a happy hour spot for me, that she had apparently tried to skip out on the bill, but they stopped her and she paid. By the way, my very next date was with the woman I eventually married. That one went much, much better. She had a 1-year-old and told me about a recent nasty divorce. No problem until she told me that the divorce was due to the baby not being his. I drove her home because she didn't have a car at the time and she asked we stop for an errand. To pick up matching t-shirts she had designed for her and her ex. She said, "I can't wait for you to meet my older brother. He just got out of jail for selling smack." I said, "Didn't you just tell me that your younger brother was addicted to smack?" "Oh yeah, I wondered how that happened." Frick this crap, I'm out. When we saw Fury in theaters, she read the subtitles out loud. I'm not sure if she thought I couldn't read them or if she needed to sound them out, but I knew at that moment no follow-up was necessary. I arrived at her place and she told me to hop in her car as she just needed to drop something off at a friend's house real quick. It wasn't a friend. It was someone she had an appointment to sell those hot oil infusers and their millions of scented inserts to. I sat in a stranger's home for 90 minutes while they smelled them all. She wanted to go to dinner afterwards, and I asked her to please drop me off at the car so I could go home. She didn't think this was cool of me as she had a business to run. I guess I didn't even make it a whole first date. I went for a meal with this girl I met through a dating app, and it was going really well. We started talking about movies, and then we decided to go to the cinema to watch Inception. She said there was a cinema nearby, but I didn't know the area at all, so I used the GPS on my phone, and she held it and directed me. Once we got there, we started walking inside, and I realized I didn't have my phone in my pocket. I said I must have left it in the car and started to walk back to get it. She was trying to get me to leave it and saying we'd miss the film, but the phone was only about a week old, so I was really paranoid about it. We checked the car for about 10 minutes, but we couldn't find it. I asked her to check her jacket and bag, but she said it wasn't there. A couple parked next to us, so I asked them to ring my number because I couldn't find it. It started to ring, and it was obviously coming from my date's handbag. She took it out and said she must have missed it. I thanked the couple and locked my car, and as I turned back around, she was walking the other way. I ran to catch up and asked what was going on, but she was very dismissive and was barely talking. That's when I realized it probably wasn't an accident and just left her to walk home alone. She forgot to take off her wedding ring at the second date. She asked if I had any love interests still in existence. When I said no, she said she didn't believe me. She told me she wanted to travel the world and see old friends, who all seemed to be guys, and thought that I, as a lawyer, should work and pay for her travels. She was insane. She also offered to do the deed in her car in the first 5 minutes of meeting. No second date for you. When she said, "I'm so glad my fiancé is still deployed," I noped out and left her with the bill for that dinner. You know, say what you will about these people, at least they're open about what they're doing. Maybe they're making sure at least these men they're meeting are aware? I don't know whether that's honorable, but it's sure preferable to leading 6 months of a delusioned but happy relationship and then getting absolutely mauled by an angry Navy SEAL coming off their tour. So, thank you, honest cheaters. Teeth as black as the night. She didn't have any diseases or syndromes, but simply no time to brush her teeth. For the record, her photos didn't show her teeth. If I ask you a question or try to talk, please reciprocate. I hate that I feel like I'm supposed to use up an arsenal of questions that will only get a brief response in return. I met her at a hospital. I was an ER patient for a hand wound and she was a phlebotomist. I asked her out to a movie and then dinner. We had a really excellent talk about comics and movies. We were getting to know each other and flirting. It was clearly a date. At the end, when I told her I'd like to do it again, she said her fiancé probably wouldn't be cool with it a second time. Here's a text conversation we had the day after the second time we went out. First time we hit a couple of bars, so we were drinking, which probably made it more bearable. Decided to give her a second shot with a beach date, but it sucked. Pretty much, she was just very negative and argumentative about almost anything I said. So I said, "Hey, thanks for driving yesterday. Anyway, I don't just want to ghost anyone because that's pretty mean, but I don't think we really click. Good luck with your move." She was moving apartments that week. Shoot. I should have guessed this was coming after how off yesterday felt. I appreciate your honesty. I know I poked you too much with the fishing comments, but were there other things I did that were really off-putting? I'd like to know so I don't keep doing them. I responded 2 days later because I was actually really freaking busy. "Sorry dude, work has been crazy busy this week, so I haven't really been on my phone. Mainly, I think we have different values and worldviews, and our differing personalities didn't allow us to get past those or discuss. Kinda seemed like a lot of the things I brought up led to negative responses, which makes it harder for self-disclosure and leaves the conversation at small talk and prevents any kind of connection. Don't take this as an attack, because I think at the root of it all, we just have different clashing personalities and never really found any common ground. Maybe I'm just being sensitive, but I did feel like there wasn't much willingness to understand my interests or values and a lack of agreeableness from you. So it felt as if I was being almost disparaged for my values and worldview. I like fishing and hunting, and she was a high-horsed vegan type. Okay, thank you for the thoughtful feedback. You're right that we have different worldviews, but I was close-minded in my approach to getting to know you and making you feel welcome. I definitely came off judgmental and bitter on Sunday, and I appreciate you explaining how that made you close off. Thanks again for taking the time to explain and for giving me a shot in the first place. Wow, that was so mature. You don't see that often enough. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I met a girl from my university for dinner one time, and she started the date off by saying she only ate with her hands and didn't use utensils because she's a super taster and can taste the metals they're made of. This wouldn't have been a problem if we were eating finger foods, of course, but it was a problem as I watched her eat a salmon fillet and wild rice like fricking Gollum. And to head off some comments I'm getting, she's not Filipina or of Asian descent. According to her Facebook, she's German/Italian, and I know those people use forks. The girl I met claimed that she was seeing other guys just to use them for free drinks, their pool, or their car was nice. I noped out of there real quick. 6 years ago, I went out with a girl who called me a racist because I don't like sushi. She chewed gum through our initial date, which was at a decent Italian place, including a bottle of good white wine. And she proceeded to tell me how she had married early, had 2 kids, girls, realized she was a lesbian, left her husband and took most of his money, lived with girlfriend number 1, left girlfriend number 1 for number 2, ended that, and then realized that long-term she needed an eggplant. I noped the frick out of there so fast. She never asked a single question about me. So frustrating. First, suggested we go to the nicest steakhouse in town. Then, when I assumed we'd go Dutch or pay for our own stuff, she assumed I was paying because she's, quote, just old-fashioned. Then asked me what my debt-to-income ratio was, and finally, upon learning I'd paid off my student loans, demanded that I pay hers off if I wanted a second date. I drove us to the venue, but I just drove home by myself after paying the bill. Go fudge yourself, Erin, you cheap witch. You see, gentlemen, one of the wonderful things about feminism is that we don't have to submit to the traditional mindset about dates. And while some of us do offer to pay for our dates, we're not legally obliged. The world of more equal dating with empowered, independent women has many perks, despite what certain people say. Enjoy it. First and only date with a girl I barely knew through some friends. I drove to her house, she got in my car, and smelled like she'd just dropped a massive turd but forgot to wipe. Went to dinner, I barely ate. Made an excuse to end early, dropped her off, and drove home with the windows down in the middle of winter. Pregnant, but no worries, the father is locked up. I was 32, she was 35. She showed up to dinner high as a kite. Dropped the C word several times, loud enough for people around us to hear. She then got loaded during dinner, ordered an expensive plate and barely touched it. She also told me I'm stupid for still buying books and childish for listening to music. She also insisted I had to take her out 2 to 3 times a week minimum. It was also implied she'd be moving in with me in the near future. She was unemployed and living at home, which honestly didn't bother me. The whole jumping into the deep end thing did. 20 minutes into the date, I text my friend, "Holy crap, turns out she's awful." She didn't say anything. Like, there's being nervous and then there's that. We were taking a film class together in school and agreed to go see a movie together, paying 50-50. That counted for extra credit. It became clear a few days beforehand that this was turning into a full-on date, and I just rolled with it. We were both single and I thought we could have a fun night out together. I asked if we could get dinner after the movie to talk about it and get to know each other better. She seemed excited by the idea, and I was looking forward to the night. I picked her up and she was dead silent. She was dressed to the nines for a casual date and was clearly nervous. I did my best to break the ice and run the conversation, and the best I could get out of her was a nervous chuckle and, yep. After the movie, I asked if she still wanted dinner, and she said absolutely, and then proceeded to watch me eat dinner while she stared at me. When I dropped her off at home, she told me she had a really nice time and hoped we could hang out outside of class again. I told her for sure, and we said goodnight. She flat out never said another word to me in class again. A year or so later, I ran into her at a party and asked her what the whole deal was about. She confessed she was so gosh darn anxious that she had no clue what to do or say. Apparently that was the first date she'd ever been on with a guy. It's a shame too, because in class we got along really well. I was just so put off by the silence that I didn't know how to approach her for the rest of the semester. Apparently, she's a semi-professional golfer now. I haven't heard from her in years, but I hope she's doing well out there. She chewed her food with her mouth open. Always kills me. Went for a walk in the woods. She walked about 5 feet ahead of me the whole time. Would think she was nervous about walking alone in the woods with a guy she didn't know, but she's the one that suggested a walk. I don't know. It was weird. She didn't even bring her wallet to the restaurant. I would have offered and obviously ended up paying, but that level of presumptuousness was an immediate turn-off. She showed up in a dirty white dress. Her hair looked like it hadn't been brushed in months. During dinner, she told me that she still lived at home, never wanted to get a job, and that she stole her dad's car while he was asleep to meet me at the restaurant. Then when she found out I was divorced, she said, "You didn't work hard enough to save your marriage." That hurt. She had no idea what I'd been through. I put down the chopsticks, went and paid, and said nice meeting you, and left. She said, "So you're a mathematician. Is it true all mathematicians are virgins?" Statistically, no. Also, goodbye. We went out for coffee. She bought a bottle of vodka and kept topping up her cup. I politely asked her what the deal was, and she said she liked to party. When it was time to go, she fell over and started screaming that I had to help her up. I did. I told her to wait right there and left. She didn't even fricking share the vodka. Well, you should have at least called a taxi. I'm going to say that I don't completely agree with your actions. Nonetheless, funny story, smooth exit, thank you for sharing. She was part of a multi-level marketing scheme like Beachbody or something. The list goes on, but that was the big no-no for me. Went out with a nice girl with similar interests, but the entire time I kept looking at her teeth and cursing my sensitive nose because I could smell her rank breath when she talked and really couldn't focus on anything else. Tinder date. She, quote, forgot to mention that she had a boyfriend. I became suspicious when I saw the background of her phone. It was a picture of her kissing with a man. When I asked her about that picture, she told me it was her boyfriend. The reason she was doing this was because her boyfriend was boring. She couldn't answer when I asked her why she didn't break up with him in the first place. Told her what she was doing wasn't cool and that she needs to be honest to her boyfriend, and I ended the date shortly after. So I take this girl out to a bar and restaurant, meeting her for the first time after talking on an online dating site. After she orders her food, she drops the bomb. She tells me for the past 7 years she's been a word that we can't say on YouTube, so let's just say it's the kind of dungeon master that has nothing to do with tabletop role-playing games. So I'm an open-minded guy. I'm cool with this. She probably has some funny stories, right? Well, she starts telling me these stories, and for the first half hour or so, they are pretty entertaining. Eventually, though, I want to talk about other things. However, anytime I try to change the subject, she immediately brings it back to dudes she's gone number 2 on. It got weird. I could barely get a word in. She basically didn't take a breath for 3 hours. Again, I'm a really open-minded guy, but there's only so many consecutive stories of gags and double-sided butt toy use a person can take before even the most open-minded amongst us starts to feel uncomfortable. At one point, I excuse myself to go to the bathroom. As I stand up and turn around, she seizes this chance to smack my butt and says, "Your butt looks like a baby pumpkin. I could bounce a quarter off it and get back 2 dimes and a nickel." Keep in mind, this lady is a professional. It was crisp and painful. To put this in perspective, I was wearing thick black jeans. She hit me in the back pocket, so a double layer of denim, and when I checked myself for the damage in the bathroom, it was a clear, fat red handprint on my butt cheek. Like I could see the lines in her hand. I could have mooned a psychic and they would have been able to predict her future. So I'm about done with this. We finish the meal and I drive her home while she still blabs tales of donkey tail butt toys and things I've never heard of, going into places I wish I hadn't heard of. So I pull into her driveway, and the second the car goes into park, she immediately grabs my family jewels, like specifically targets them. And it wasn't hot, it was a hostage situation where she had all the power. Then she straight up licks the side of my face, chin to hairline, her tongue as big as a Shetland pony. I do not want. Then she looks me in the eyes and says menacingly, "I'm gonna strap you into my dungeon." The frick you are? I choose life! I think to myself. How do I get out of this? She literally has me by the stones here. So here's what I come up with. I tell her, hell yeah, let's do it. I have a special toy I keep in my trunk. Is that okay? She says, sure, bring any toys you want. So I tell her to meet me at her doorstep while I bust it out because I want it to be a surprise. As she steps out of the car, she gives me a look that she thinks is hot, but is actually terrifying. The second her feet touch the ground, I slam the car into reverse and fly out of her driveway as fast as my car can go. You know how most people pull out of a driveway, switch to drive, and then drive off ahead? I didn't do that. I didn't want 1 second of switching gears to give her the chance to catch me. I pulled out of the driveway and just kept going down the street in reverse for about 5 blocks. The passenger door was flapping around, still open, because I took off before she shut it. When I'm satisfied that she won't catch me, I close the door, put it in drive, and go home. Gotta get back on that horse, right? Wrong. I got home, Iced my sack and deleted my online profile. Not today, Satan. How did you see an idiot completely blow all of their money? Well, the accountant at the small business I work at does a lot of funny things with money. Has a perfectly good, paid-off car, but it was slightly too old to drive for Uber to make extra money, so she got a lease on a brand new car through Uber. After a month, she found out she wasn't making enough extra money from Uber to even pay the lease, and her commute was too far to drive the Uber car to work and back because they limit the miles. After she weaseled out of her Uber lease, she decided she needed a brand new Harley that she had no idea how to drive. This was over a year ago. She's ridden it exactly once around her neighborhood. She'll be paying for this motorcycle for another 4 years at least. She took out a second mortgage on her home to fix up to get ready to sell, and she's so happy with the remodel that she's keeping the house. She's a single mother twice over, and is always telling us how some nice man from her church paid for her daughter's school trip or whatever. She is the dumbest person I've ever met, and I'm always a little freaked out that she's handling our money. Guy I know won 10 grand. They then spent that 10 grand trying to win again. One of my coworkers bought a new car because, wait for it, she couldn't afford to put tires on her current one. This one just hurts. It hurts my brain. People only see the payments, not the cost. My boyfriend's friend's wife just did that with her Prius. She traded in her Prius that was a few years old for a brand new one because the old one needed tires and it would be the same monthly, except longer, and now they owe more than it's worth. Blew my mind when my boyfriend told me that story because the friend didn't seem that stupid and neither did the wife. Friend got $150K in life insurance from her mum passing away. It was gone in a year. She paid a $20K bail for her boyfriend. At the end of that year, he was also gone. She works at Popeyes now. God damn. I'm no financial genius, but at least I feel like when you get a gift like that, you have to put it into your house or something to help yourself out long term. Buy yourself 1 or 2 nice things, sure, but that's too much money to be an idiot with. Divorce. Growing up, we were good friends with a family that made it big with buying and selling airplane parts pre-internet. The couple went through a nasty divorce that got strung out over a 6-year period. The wife was 100% convinced through her crapbag lawyers that her husband had funneled money into secret accounts. He hadn't, and she wasn't happy with his initial offer, which was the mansion, half the multi-millions, and $5 grand a month for child support alone. The court proceedings went on for years, and at the end of it all, they pretty much had nothing due to court fees and lawyer fees. His business failed because of how unstable air travel became after September 11th. If she had just split things and taken that mansion and the other payments, she would have gotten $4.2 million from the divorce, not having worked a day in her life. In short, divorce is one hell of a substance. I have an idiot friend who's getting something like 30% of his wages garnished. Why? Because he forgot to pay his student loan. He's crap at paying bills, and it's not because he doesn't make the money for it. He has a decent job. He just literally ignores paper mail and emails reminding him and then eventually demanding him to pay off things like credit card bills and his student loans. If he does bother to read them, it literally goes in one ear and out the other. Just slides right out of his mind. After a few months, he'll remember, log into his account, pay the payment in full with accrued interest, and then just shrug it off like it's normal. Somehow, he forgot to pay his student loans for something like a year, and it went to collections. I told him he could even set up automatic payments for that crap, and he agrees it's a good idea. And then he just never does it. I offered to set it up for him, and it's always, later. A friend at 37 who had never worked any job that paid above minimum wage inherited tons of money from his father. Despite having absolutely no experience in any of those positions or even how to run or manage a business, he decided to open up a restaurant which was a disaster from day one and closed down not long afterward. Then decided to get into photography, threw away tons of money on super fancy equipment he had absolutely no idea what it was or how to use, and never made a penny. Tried to start a DJ business. No bite. Disappeared off the face of the earth right afterwards. My brother-in-law brought a used BMW for 15 grand with a credit card at 26% APR. This is the winner.
Actually, I think you'll find the bank is the winner.
Yes, he's the definition of financial irresponsibility. He used to buy Gucci belts and Armani shirts. Now that he has 2 young children, that's stopped and he's driving a beat-up Trailblazer. He's 42 now, lives in a bedroom he rents from my in-laws with his 2 kids and wife, and is working 2 jobs to get by. It's sad, especially for my 2 nieces, but I feel little sympathy for him because for years I lectured him about being financially responsible, but he cared less about that than the image of having money that he put out. My friend, whom I love dearly, has been driving me pretty insane. Her parents are terrible with their money, and she's been complaining for ages about how inconsiderate and irresponsible they are. How they infuriate her because they buy things they don't actually need with the reasoning of, well, it'll make us or someone else happy, so what's the problem? She calls me a month or so ago because thanks to her parents and their irrational spending habits and irresponsibility, she may not be able to finish school. She doesn't know how she'll manage to eat or afford anything she needs, and she can't get a full-time job right now either. So, she and her boyfriend, who she's breaking up with soon, decide that instead of saving their very limited money and using it wisely, they'd impulsively buy 2 puppies. I don't know the breed, but they'll be huge dogs when they grow up. They brought them from a sketchy stranger on Facebook who they don't know and who charged them hundreds of dollars for the pups. Her reasoning for getting them when she knows she can't afford them? They'll make me happy, so it'll help with the stress of not having any money. I'm still enraged, honestly. The hypocrisy, irresponsibility, and impulsivity is maddening. My friend is basically a 37-year-old child with a good salary. One month his water bill was $700. He asked me if I thought it was because his sink faucet was dripping. I said it sounded more like a broken pipe. He never found out the issue, he just paid the bill and said, oh well. A guy I worked with was always complaining that he was poor, although later I found out that this was solely due to bad budgeting and impulse spending. He was really good at his job, so I suggested that he do some freelance IT security consulting on the side. He did a job for a high-end jeweler which paid him about $2,000 for 2 days' work. He was ecstatic that he finally had enough money to fix all the problems he'd been putting off for ages, like the oil leak on his car, a new pair of work shoes, and getting his boiler fixed. At the end of the job, he was leaving the retailers with cash in hand when he spotted a high-end watch in a display case, which was $2,000 down from $3,500 or so. Unable to pass up such a bargain, he handed the $2,000 right back over and walked out with the watch. 2 days later, he was complaining because his fridge was empty. My response was, at least you can use the watch to time how long it takes you to starve. Pay their current vehicle off with savings, then immediately trade in that car and get a car worth a lot more, only to be back in deeper debt with less in their savings. This person made a lot of other stupid choices, but that's a different story. Every once in a while, my stepdad will calculate how much money he could save by quitting drinking, then decides to quit and starts spending like he has that money. And spoiler alert, he doesn't actually quit. This is the closest the narrator feels he's come to any of these. Not the drinking part, but deciding that because you've saved on something, you're entitled to spend it on something else. Dumb as all hell. And then some unexpected emergency cost comes along and knocks you further down the hole. Grew up fairly wealthy, went to a private school with lots of other wealthy kids. Knew one girl who had 2 wealthy parents pass away when she was young and lived with an uncle. She was messed up as a kid, really wild, always the first to try everything, in her own way incredibly sweet, and always protected the less popular kids. Anyway, she hit 21, got a huge trust fund. Her uncle put up a fight for the money because he knew she was going to go nuts with it. It wasn't for the cash, he had much more than her. Ultimately, he lost and she got everything. It was the beginning of the end for her. She blew through the massive wealth in 2 years, doing untold amounts of white snow, binge drinking, trips to crazy places, constantly surrounded by people using her for party money. We're talking millions of dollars here. Not a cent invested anywhere. Anyways, 2 years later, she's back with her uncle, not a penny to her name. He loves her, so of course he takes her in. Everyone who was hanging out with her for the past 2 years is gone. Everyone laughs at her behind her back. A few hospital instances where she took too many substances left her a little slow. She tries school, but it doesn't work. Her uncle gave her a, quote, job, but it's a token thing. At least she's lucky enough that she had someone to look after her in the end. My sister-in-law had a kiosk at the mall that didn't make that much money. She doesn't have another job except Uber sometimes. She has 2 kids and always takes them to eat out and buy stuff that costs beyond her means. She lives with my mother-in-law and pays next to nothing for rent, so there's really no excuse. She refuses to even slightly thrift on her kids' clothes and constantly buys them stuff like Lacoste and Ralph Lauren because image is apparently everything. Her oldest just started kindergarten this year. He plays soccer too, so she splurged on the high-end equipment, and he's not really even that into the sport. Anyway, his teacher said that in her 25 years of teaching, this was the first time she was ever instructed by a parent to make sure their kid changed his shoes before PE. I just got the news this morning that she lost the kiosk yesterday. Too many fines for showing up late to open and bringing her youngest to work with her, so they shut her down. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. My friend started up a gaming store, like for tabletop games, Magic the Gathering, D&D, gaming figurines, among other things. He mistakenly thought that because he was so interested in the material, it would be easy for him to jump into. He has no business acumen and has never owned a business in the past. He never had a lot of money, he always rented and was always behind bills, had child support and kids to pay for, though he was really good at penny pinching and saving money. But that was only half the equation. He ended up borrowing a bunch of cash from his new wife. He set up his store location in a small town that's rather out of the way, a bad location. He claimed the store was only temporary and was supposed to be a storage site so he could ship items sold off the internet. Thus, he never got much traffic and therefore very few sales. However, it was a source of contention between him and his wife. He had confided in me that his store was ultimately a reason to get out of the house and away from the family, which is not really a good reason to throw money into a business. He and his wife ended up divorcing. He decided to quit the store. He ended up with a ton of merchandise, packing his meager apartment that he'd been trying to sell. Worst of all, he apparently didn't keep his books. He's apparently somewhere around $50,000 in tax debt to the state and increasing with fines. I find this astounding because there's no way he had enough money to justify that much in taxes in the period he owned and operated the store. I wonder if something else was afoot. I gave my brother a step-by-step plan to cover his rent, keep his job, fill up his car, and pay me back within a 1-week period. He was tight on money. I found him at Foot Locker with a large bag 2 hours later. That must have hurt. Yep, 2 pairs of Nikes forcibly shoved up someone's butt would hurt quite a bit. I used to work in a bank offering investment and lending advice, car loans, mortgages, retirement savings, that sort of thing. I had a client who was a successful lawyer, and his father was a very successful lawyer. He married a successful lawyer. They made a lot of money, easily over $1 million each, so $2 million per year gross household income. Every week they had 0 money left. I tried to help by setting up an automatic contribution to a savings account. If they don't see it, maybe they won't spend it. Nope, they spent it. Every week they'd call me to transfer the money out of their savings and into their checking account. So I sat down with them and went over their budget. They didn't have one. They had no concept of what things cost. They didn't have a firm grasp of how much they made or how much they spent. They bought impulsively and recklessly. The Dodge Viper was a big thing at the time, so he went out and bought one and financed it. He didn't have the space for it, so he rented space to store it. He never drove it. He had it customized with expensive aftermarket stuff. It was a work of art. I don't know if he ever drove it at all. He had no interest in showing it or anything. It was a money pit. She had never cut her own finger or toenails in her life. Her whole life she had just gone for a weekly mani-pedi. More frequently if she chipped a nail or something. She shopped, like a lot. She always looked amazing. They were very smart people but had grown up with money and had no concept of it. Like it would always just be there. I tried to help them budget, but that means deciding to go with something or delaying a purchase, and they'd never done it before, so why start now? I left the bank and they were still going week to week. Wonderful people, but just no concept of money. Me, when I was 18 years old and applied for credit. 10 years later, I finally finished paying off those damn cards. I knew a guy that bought a Trans Am, fully loaded and had a $700 payment in 1985. That's like $1,650 today. He ended up bankrupt. Another guy I knew told me he was going to declare bankruptcy for over $4,000 debt about 25 years ago. We were riding in his late model truck and I said, Why don't you sell the truck, settle the debt, and save up for a new one? He got furious and yelled at me for saying that. He ended up bankrupt and still lost the truck. I bet holding the "I told you so" gave our author an actual aneurysm, because it sure as crap just gave me a headache just reading about this from a random dude on the internet 25 years after the fact. My friend. When I met her, I thought she was so financially stable and responsible. She wanted to spend a day shopping for more conservative clothes to go visit family out of state. We tagged along and had a great time. She spent close to $1,000 on new clothes and taking us out to dinner that day. I've since learned that she has zero ability to budget, frequently can't make rent, and basically can't take care of herself. Opens a store credit card every time she's offered because the more lines of credit you have open, the better. She has about 50 credit cards open. Well, that's anxiety-inducing, and I don't even know the girl. I have a friend who's 40 years old, single, lives by himself, and will buy green herb as a priority over some of his bills. Every 2 to 3 months, I'll get a call asking for a bailout. He's also on Social Security and lives in a subsidized apartment and pays $120 for rent. It's very, very frustrating to get those calls for help. I went to community college my first year. I knew this guy that was from a super low-income family, and he received massive amounts of student loans. He blew it all on a used car, wheels, and a sound system. I tried to tell him it was a loan and not a grant. He disagreed. I lost touch with him a year or two later, but he has to be underwater in debt. College friend graduated with over $100K in private student loans. The bank offered a $5K credit towards the loans as a graduation gift, or $1.5 grand in cash. Guess which one they took and used as a down payment on a new car. For clarification, this was a new car to replace the perfectly good used car they already had, and they didn't get into a lucrative career. Last I heard, they were working food service. I have a colleague in her mid-50s who's divorced with no kids. She's the sole means of her own financial support. There's no parents or siblings to fall back on. She lives alone in an apartment. She recently took out her student debt consolidation loan. As soon as she gets those credit cards maxed out, she takes out a loan, pays the cards off, and runs them up again. I'd feel sorry for her if the charges were for general living expenses, but they're not. They're for highlights in her hair, manicures, trips to the Caribbean with boyfriend du jour, those cute sandals that she'll wear twice before replacing them with cuter sandals, high-end everything, makeup, perfume, and clothing. Once in a while, she'll lament about her $40K in loans and the fact that she's literally 2 paychecks from being homeless, and I'll gently point out that less trips to the salons and the islands might put her in a better financial position. I work hard and deserve nice things. I deserve vacations. I deserve to feel good and look good. Don't tell me how to spend my money. This coming from a woman who has to pay for her lunch with a credit card the day before payday because she's overdrawn on her checking account. I've seen her do this, and she explained why she was doing it. She refuses to believe that she's the cause of her own financial difficulties. I know someone that will refuse to work a regular job, lives off the women in his life, doesn't have 2 nickels to rub together at 52 years old, and complains constantly about how everything is rigged to keep him from succeeding. One of my old friends was living paycheck to paycheck, less than that some months. She was eating food from work for breakfast, which was one of those ice cream places. When I was asking her about her finances to see if she could cut back something, she mentioned that she smoked recreational green herb every day, several times a day, but she said, "It's only a hobby, I could stop it at any time." However, she refused to stop it when I told her it was a possible avenue to cut back on if she wanted to comfortably make her bills. It got kind of tiresome to constantly hear about how she had no money for food. My friend had saved up about $8K and was planning to use it to down a new car. Instead, his parents forced him to use that money to buy his little brother a used car. The younger brother is the spoiled golden child who's supposed to lift the family out of poverty. The older brother, my friend, is the kind-hearted but apparently dumb one who had to drop out of school to work and help the family. It was pretty easy for them to force his hand in helping to buy the car. Rather than buying something cheap and reliable like a Camry, the dumb little brother goes full JDM and buys a crappy, overpriced Nissan Silvia. The car still needed work, and the idiot didn't even know how to work on cars. When I found out what happened, I was freaking livid. I know how hard my friend had worked to save up that money. What's worse is that the younger brother crashed the car a few months later and it just sat in front of their house for almost a year before they sold it off for dimes. Not the worst, but I had a strong lesson about money management. I was 11 or something. Hitman Blood Money just came out. I was hyped. I loved that series, so I started to save money right away. I was saving by walking home instead of taking a bus. I was saving by not eating candy or drinking soda. I was really close. But one day as I was walking home, I saw my cousin. He was holding an RC car, brand new. I asked about it and he said he won it with luck. He told me there's a game in the market near us. I was amazed. So you can pay $1 and spin the wheel? I wanted to try that game, and I wanted to win. I said to myself, okay, John, just 2 to 3 games. I went there and spun the wheel. And then I spun it again and again. I lost, but I still had a lot of money, right? When I realized I'd blown most of my Hitman money, I was determined more than sad. I wasn't going to afford Hitman, but I still had a chance for that car, so I spun again. Reality set in when I was sitting on the curb with a bag full of crappy candy and plastic vampire teeth. I lost everything I made in 1 month over 1 hour. I learned a hard lesson early, so I'm really grateful, but I still keep my saved money somewhere I can't reach easily, just in case. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories, or if you want some vibey music to put on in the background, check out easymode. If you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot. Everything linked in the description.